confidence in letting me fill Scott's shoes. I know they're big shoes to fill, and I will do my best. Fortunately, Brad teed this up very easily for me to get started because we have an amazing speaker this morning, Dr. Carol Barnes, who I'm fortunate to know personally. Carol, as I think many of us know, is Regents Professor at the U of A in psychology, neurology, and neuroscience. I learned a few things looking at Carol's bio, though, in terms of her educational background. Got her BA at UC Riverside, master's and PhD in psychology in Canada at Carleton University, postdoc, 3 different places, Dalhousie University, University of Oslo, University of College London. And then in 1982, got her first job, making her father very happy in the Department of Psychology, the University of Colorado. And we were fortunate to get Carol here in Arizona right after that in 1990. So at the University of Arizona, Carol is the Evelyn McKnight Endowed Chair for Learning and Memory and Aging, Director of the Evelyn McKnight Brain Institute, Director of the Division of Neural Systems and Memory and Aging. She has clearly made a huge impact nationally and internationally. She's been past president of the Society for Neuroscience. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it has over 30,000 members. It's just an amazing honor. And we're honored to have her speak today about a $60 million grant that she obtained from the National Institutes of Health on the Precision Aging Network, which I was commenting to Dave. I saw a paper you had written about that with Lee Ryan before all of this. I thought, wow, that's an amazing paper. I think Lee was the first author on that, and I emailed Lee telling her how great I thought it was. So this is just fantastic for me to welcome you here, Carol. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Hi, Eric. I'm sorry I'm not here.
Apologies for not being there in person.
I
I'm glad you
understand.
could join us.
Okay.
Well,
First of all, thanks for thinking of inviting me to address your board and senior scientific staff. My focus today is going to be mainly to describe our newly funded National Institute on Aging U19 grant that Rick just mentioned, the Precision Aging Network, closing the gap between cognitive health span and human lifespan. If I slip into this, and I will today, we call it PAN, just it's easier to call it PAN, or Precision Aging Network. So it's my hope that we can share with you how PAN fits into the overall landscape of the biomedical community here in Arizona. I think you can appreciate that it blends very well with the biomedical community. It fits seamlessly with the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium, including the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, the ASU Banner Neurodegenerative Disease Research Center, and the Center for Innovation in Brain Science at the University of Arizona that Robbie Britton runs. But first, I'd like to take this opportunity just to introduce myself to you, and actually tell you a little bit about my scientific trajectory so that you can understand why I am today leading a very large study focused on normative brain and cognitive aging in humans, when I've spent my life as a basic scientist and electrophysiologist doing basic science on rats and monkeys. So let's go. So my interest in aging and memory began in 1972. This was stimulated by a call from my mother when I was in graduate school at the Department of Psychology at Carleton University in Ottawa. She called to raise her concern about my grandfather, who was sometimes getting a bit disoriented on the long walks he liked to take. So she thought that because I was in graduate school in psychology, I should be able to figure out whether this was normal or not. So, so I went to the library, which one did in those days, to figure out what might be going on and to see if what my grandfather was experiencing was normal or whether it was something to be concerned about. And you have to remember that in 1972, the National Institute on Aging did not yet exist, wasn't established until '76. So in fact, there was limited research on aging, and a summary of what, sort of a summary picture of what I could find in the library is what you see here. It's depicted in this slide. You see beautiful, big, nice entorhinal cortical cells in the young 20-year-old. And as you go through the years, when you get to the 90-year individual, the cells in the brain of this individual, of these individuals, was portrayed as being shriveled and really looking pretty bad. This is a particularly disturbing picture of brain aging because, as you probably know, your neurons are born largely before your birth, and they're with you. They die with you at the end of your life. So there are rare exceptions, of course. I was shocked at the description of aging at that time being, you get old, you lose thousands and thousands of cells, you become demented, period. And I kind of knew in my heart that this had to be misguided or wrong. I knew many older individuals that were anything but demented, and the question of normative aging in the absence of degeneration really had not been examined in any rigorous way. And so this lack of definitive answer for my mother about my grandfather is what initially captured my scientific interest in brain aging and memory. Today, we know that this depiction of brain aging is wrong, but I have to tell you that I still see these kinds of pictures arise in publications or in textbooks and so forth, even today, even though I've been fighting for years and years, decades, to get this out of the literature. And even though I only learned this much later, my grandfather, as it turns out, was not showing signs of dementia, but he had spatial memory problems. And what we know now is that all mammals show changes in spatial memory at the age at which they are considered to be old, in the absence of neurodegenerative disease. So, but this I didn't know until very much later, but put the puzzle together. And with respect to rampant cell loss that was thought to happen back in the 70s, I'll give you an example from the hippocampus, a brain structure that's critically important for memory. And we now know that in the hippocampus, there's no loss in the numbers of cells in the major cell types, not in the granule cells that you see depicted here, CA3 or CA1 pyramidal cells across age. And this is true for mice, rats, dogs, monkeys, and humans, in which the cells have been systematically counted. As it turns out, in the 70s, I switched my previously planned PhD experiments at that time, which were really in developmental psychopharmacology, to the topic of aging memory and brain plasticity in the rodent model of human aging. My thesis experiments provided the first evidence of spatial memory accuracy does decline with age in rats, and the ability of the brain to lay down memory traces and the synaptic connections made between cells also declines and is correlated with that. So from there, in these early years, I continued to study how brain circuits change with age, using the rat as a model. But then in 2000, after I'd been in Arizona for about 10 years, I began to study memory and the aging brain in non-human primates as a bridge to understanding a mammal that was closer, evolutionarily at least, to humans. So as you all know, it's curious, but it's only humans that are stricken with Alzheimer's disease. Other animals do not spontaneously contract AD. So what I've been studying, in fact, through my career in rats and monkeys, is a normative aging process. Why is it important to study normal aging, you might say, when it's apparent that we need to get a handle on diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and other Alzheimer's disease related dementias? Well, one answer can be found in a study that looked at a representative sample that was drawn systematically across all regions of the United States of those people over 70 years of age. Okay, so over 70 years, 14% have dementia. And the two most prevalent types are shown here, Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. 14%, of course, is a huge, terrible number, but that means that 86% of us over 71 are not demented. So now in 2021, last September, I was able to collaborate with a group of scientists who had my same passion for understanding the aging brain and cognition, but this time in humans. The goal of this PAN or Precision Aging Network study is to do experiments necessary to determine the factors that promote brain and cognitive resilience during aging and those that confer risk. The focus is on defining normative brain and cognitive function across the lifespan. Of course, as you see here, as you get older and older, if you just restrict decades, over 90 is 37%, but still that means a majority of us over 90 are not demented. Okay. The strategic goal of PAN is to develop the essential knowledge and technology to apply precision medicine concepts to predict individual brain health risks so that we can discover personalized solutions to maximize cognitive health span. Okay, you might say to me, okay, what do you mean by cognitive health span? It's not necessarily commonly in the literature. It's easy to explain this way. So if this is your lifespan, whatever that may be, we're not trying to make you live to 150, but whatever your lifespan is, what our goal is to close the gap between optimal cognition and your lifespan as closely as we can, because it's often observed that there is a wide gap between your brain and cognitive health and your lifespan. So the kinds of questions, what kinds of questions are we after? Well, first, what are the drivers that impact brain function as we age? We want to understand both the variables that confer resilience, as well as those that risk for impairment. Second, for a given individual, can we predict, prevent, or slow the progress of unwanted changes? And finally, of course, how can optimal brain and cognitive function be maintained as we age? And Matt Huntelman, Xiao Chen, and I wrote an article on this in TIMS a while back. But we've argued that we need to reinvent brain and cognitive aging research by achieving sample sizes that are large, representative of the heterogeneous population in the United States, and that could be followed longitudinally in order for us to be able to individualize our solutions. We've taken on the challenge of doing this in PAN and believe that this approach will be important, not only for those of us who are lucky enough to be aging normatively, but also those at risk for AD or ADRD. An additional point to make here is the importance of the interactions and synergies that can be gained by combining both digital, as in digital platforms for testing, as well as face-to-face research designs, as we are doing in projects 1 and 2 that I'm going to explain to you in a bit later. All right, first what I want to do is just show you the structure of PAN, which is shown here. This grant was $11,000 32 pages long. I mean, it's the biggest thing I've ever tried to do. There are 4 cores and 7. There are 4 projects and 7 cores. So I'm going to talk to you about this now, just reviewing briefly what the projects are. So the 4 projects are supported by these 7 cores, and the Precision Aging Network Project 1 we call MindCrowd. Project 2 we call Healthy Minds for Life. Project 3 we call Biomarkers of Brain Health. And Project 4, Analytic Integration. So these projects are supported by the functions that are accomplished in all of these cores that you see here: the administrative, data science, regulatory, recruitment, cognitive assessment and neuroimaging, non-invasive technology, and molecular profiling cores. I know that went by fast, but we need a big support structure to enable us to accomplish what we want to in these projects. And before I go into more detail on the goals of the 4 projects, I want to give you an overview of the players in each of these projects. So what I've done here is just list the leads and co-leads for both the projects and the cores. PAN is led by investigators at the University of Arizona. I'm the PI, and most of the investigators are at the University of Arizona. PAN is broader than the University of Arizona. It includes a consortium of academic, public, and private partnerships. And this is where I want to point out to you here that the Flinn Foundation support of Matt Hunkelman to further develop his MindCrowd web-based testing platform in 2017 was tremendously helpful to the success of this big Precision Aging Network grant. So you should rightly count us among the grants that you essentially seeded here. Matt, of course, is Matt Hunkelman is at TGen, as you know. He's the lead of Project 1 that we call MindCrowd. And Zhao Chen is the co-lead of Project 1, and she is the chair of the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Arizona. Lee Ryan is the head of the psychology department at the University of Arizona and is lead of Project 2 that we call Healthy Minds for Life. And Tanya Rundeck at the University of Miami is the co-lead of Project 2. As I'll describe in more detail in a minute, Project 2 involves 4 testing sites, in-depth testing sites. And the lead site, of course, is the University of Arizona. And the other 3 sites are the University of Miami, Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and Emory University in Atlanta. Okay, Project 3, Paul Worley is in the Department of Neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University, and he is the lead of Project 3 that we call Biomarker Development. And Meredith Hay is the co-lead of Project 3, and she's in the Department of Physiology at the University of Arizona. Nick Shore is the lead of Project 4. Nick is at TGen, and we call this project Model Integration. Bonnie LaFleur, who is the Director of Health Outcomes and Pharmacoeconomic Research Center at the University of Arizona, is the co-lead of Project 4. Okay, let's go on to develop what these projects are for you. So there are 4 primary specific aims for the Precision Aging Network. And the first aim is to characterize a large, diverse, cross-sectional cohort via the web-based testing platform known as MindCrowd, which you probably are familiar with. Okay, MindCrowd. The MindCrowd site was initially created by Matt Hunkelman from TGen, has been operational since 2013. And since 2013, MindCrowd has recruited through its web-based platform 288,208 individuals to take the MindCrowd test. These individuals are between the ages of 18 and 90. And this is a huge age range. So this is remarkable that we're getting people to take it across the lifespan. So we get a window into cognition and brain health from 18 on up to 100. I think Matt has a 100-year-old individual in his study. We proposed in the grant to increase this number to 350,000 in the same, and using methods that we now have funding to implement to increase participation from across this country in urban and rural areas, across educational and socioeconomic levels, and across different races and ethnicities. This is not a drawing of the United States, as you might think it might have been. It is actually, each dot you see on the map on the United States represents a location of a Minecraft participant. So you can just see yourself how well represented it is. But you know, yeah, these are low population areas, but I mean, the lower population areas, we're focused on filling in this map as much as we can. And we're ambitious. We think we can, we promised 350,000. We think we could probably get it up to 500,000. That's what our real goal is in the back of our heads. So the stars represent the locations of the individuals studied in the different areas I told you about for the second project. This Minecraft sample currently represents the largest cross-sectional study in the United States to characterize factors associated with age-related cognitive impairment. It's the largest geographically representative sample in the world of any country, actually, right now. And we want to make it bigger and more representative. Okay. Under this aim, we'll not only expand the numbers of individuals tested, but we're expanding. We're able now to, with the input from the grant, to expand the cognitive test battery. And we hope to administer other types of tests to this really large cohort that can be administered in ways via the web, which I'm going to end with. I'll show you some creative ways that we're trying to implement at the end. We also want to begin to track individuals longitudinally so that we can get actual change measures. We have 5 years, so we can, that from people that have already taken the test, we can get probably 3 longitudinal time points in these 5 years. That's aim 1 or project 1. Aim 2. The second aim is to create a cohort of 1,620 individuals drawn from Minecraft test takers who will undergo comprehensive in-person cognitive and biological assessments of individual brain health risks in 4 geographically distinct regions in the United States, as I told you already: Tucson, Miami, Atlanta, and Baltimore. Individuals in this cohort will be between 50 and 79 years, for practical reasons we had to, and because of advice from our National Institute on Aging colleagues saying, no, it would be just far too big if you extended it beyond that. Okay. So the focus on this project will be on non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black, and Hispanic Latino individuals, again, residing in the Tucson, Miami, Atlanta, and Baltimore areas. We also had to narrow our race ethnicity goals from our original submission, our resubmission. We have had these 3. So Tucson and Miami will focus on non-Hispanic white and Hispanic Latino individuals, populations that are enriched in these 2 areas. The Atlanta and Baltimore sites will focus on non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Black individuals. These populations are enriched in these 2 areas of the country. The in-depth measures obtained from this population include biometric and physical measures, markers from blood, MRI, carotid ultrasound, and genomics to create risk categories to predict individual differences in cognitive functioning. The participants will also take an expanded version of the Mindcrowd web-based cognitive test and more demographic questions, as well as additional neuropsychological tests and language analysis. We're also trying to obtain CSF from those participants who want to donate. Marilyn Albert, our lead at Johns Hopkins, has some experience with collecting CSF from older individuals, and she figures we might get about 50% if we're lucky. But we have a couple people here in Arizona, Aliachi and Dr. Goldfarb, who are expert at getting people to understand why it will be okay to give CSF. So we're hoping that we can get better than 50%, but we don't really know that. So all the in-depth measures will be, all the in-depth cognitive measures will be evaluated then alongside biological measures that are listed at the left of the slide. And the cohort studied in more depth will also be followed longitudinally to enable measures of change to be determined. So we'll get three tests from the initial group and 2 from ones that entered later. But anyway, we are aiming to evaluate people longitudinally again for the critical change measures that we need for our predictive modeling. Okay, the third aim. Third aim is to discover biomarkers of pathways in the brain that may confer risk or resilience to brain function and cognition. And we're going to do this primarily using participants in the in-depth Project 2 study, but we'll also conduct this work using biological specimens that can be collected in the larger Project 1 study. Remarkably, I mean, even Matt, when he talks about this, shakes his head and they've never met me. You know, these hundreds of thousands of people have never met me, but I asked them to prick their fingers and put blood spots on some filter paper. And many of them do that and send these specimens back to him, which he's perfected the analytic techniques to gain a lot of genetic information that would usually not be possible from web-based studies. Okay, but back to Project 3. Project 3 experiments will focus on developing biomarkers for 3 novel genes that are known to be important for optimal function of brain circuits. And I know that you're not all neuroscientists, so I'm trying to make this as accessible to you as possible. I'm excited about them. I think you should be, but it might be a little obscure. But let's just go for it. Okay, these 3 include NPTX2. NPTX2 may act as a resilience factor in the brain. And I'm saying this based on actual very, very exciting data that Paul Worley has, where we have Alzheimer's individuals that have come to autopsy. They've been diagnosed with an Alzheimer-like brain, and they are demented. Then you have the same kind of people coming to autopsy with an Alzheimer's-like pathological diagnosis, but they were asymptomatic. This NPTX2 is one factor that distinguishes between the asymptomatic and symptomatic individuals. I mean, so those circuits that are critical for cognition somehow involve, involve NPTX2 in these circuits in important ways. There are other factors that go along with this, but anyway, that's why I'm excited, particularly excited about NPTX2 because it seems to be so protective. Okay, another one, mTOR, regulates metabolism and may control the rate of aging. This has been widely studied in the biology of aging, and mTOR is known to be a factor that does control rate of aging. GD2 is involved in regulating oxidative stress in the brain. We know that it's really important to regulate the amount of stress that occurs in the brain to protect brain cell function. So we think these 3 pathways have very high probability of importantly contributing to our knowledge of where somebody stands in terms of brain health, if we can get the biomarkers, if we can get the blood-based biomarkers discovered and implemented in the right ways. So with these biomarkers, we hope to be able to predict trajectories of brain and cognitive health outcomes for individuals. Okay, the fourth and final aim is to effectively set a new standard for predictive modeling that will ultimately be able to inform intervention strategies for maintaining cognitive health for individuals. This book, after all, is the big grand goal, is that we can have these models that will be predictive. We understand that we're going to need to collect large samples of longitudinally characterized individuals to begin to sort out which risk factors in which people lead to compromised brain and cognitive health. So Project 4 will use data collected in Projects 1, 2, and 3, but we'll augment these data to test hypotheses using data collected and made available in the public domain. There are huge databases that we can make predictions for and then test our predictions in the public domain. We believe that the outcomes in this final project will put us in a strong position to propose and implement intervention approaches for the next 5 years of the grant. How's that going forward? I haven't even had a grant for 1 year, but I'm thinking about the next 5 years, where it's all building up to be able to predict these interventions for individuals. So in terms of innovation, I just want to introduce you to approaches that are taken in one of our more innovative cores. It's an unusual course. Cores aren't supposed to stand out. Cores are just supposed to be supportive, and most of our cores are. All of our cores are using some cutting edge technologies that aren't necessarily standard, but this one really does stand out, and it's the non-invasive technology core, who is led by Esther Sternberg and co-led by Ray Runyon, both at the University of Arizona. And two other critical players in this are Matthias Snell in the psychology department at UA and Bijan Nafjali at Baylor College of Medicine. He used to be in the Department of Surgery at UA, which is why we originally knew him, but he's come back to join this, this project. Oops, okay. Part of the reason that this non-invasive technology core is so exciting is that we may be able to get the larger Project 1 participants to be examined using some of these tests. For example, Matthias may be able to collect speech samples from tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 people for his analyses of components of speech that we know are informative with respect to cognitive status and with respect to emotional health. Okay. And Ray is working on a way to send out his glass beads to Project 1 participants just by mail to roll around in their hands. So you actually roll these beads, around in your hands and put them back in the, container and send them back to him so that molecular biomarkers of stress can be measured in large numbers in these participants. It can measure all sorts of things, not only cortisol, but many other kinds of metabolites. It's really a remarkable and very novel technology. And then Bijan has perfected a video-based test of frailty, which has been validated. And he believes will be able to be performed at home with high reliability to give us a huge sample of participants' performance. And this is, remember, Project 1, between 18 years and above, across lifespan. So Bijan has been piloting ways to have individuals set up a video monitoring system at home. And it's just these elbow flexions can be collected with special software to de-identify individuals' faces. And Of course, all three of these methods, the language, the sweat analysis, and the frailty measures will be applied to individuals that participate in the in-depth study in Project 2, but we hope to expand some of these novel measures to Project 1 participants as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the project. And finally, I ask you to please go to the Minecraft website if you haven't already done so, and take the memory test and answer some demographic questions. And it only takes 10 minutes. And you just type in mindcrowd.org and you'll get there. So, and finally, thank you so much for supporting Matt, who has been really critical component of this endeavor from the beginning.
Carol, that was amazing. Wow, it's been flooding all over us here. It's still great science. We've got maybe about 15 minutes for questions that we could have, if anybody would like to start us off.
So I'd just like to make a comment and say, thank you so much for that presentation, and the work and time that you put into creating it is evident because we could understand it. It was,
I could receive no higher compliment.
yeah, really well done. Thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, Carol, if this question isn't too far afield, does any of this attempt to correlate diet with Alzheimer's or nutrition?
We aren't specifically looking at Alzheimer's patients. We're specifically focusing on normative aging, but we have extensive questionnaires on diet that we are intending to implement in these questions because, of course, we're collecting many lifestyle variables. So things about how they self-report exercise, how they self-report their diet, and so forth. So yes, that's going to be a really important component to put in our modeling. With this modeling, we're really trying to collect everything that we can and then get rid of the variables that are most maybe time consuming and expensive and so forth, if we have other things that actually better predict how the brain and cognition are doing across the lifespan. So it's really a dimensionality reduction problem, and nutrition has got to be there. It is one that is so important. So I mean, we'll see how it comes out with respect to all others. But I hate to say this in front of Eric, but if we can get rid of imaging, wow, that would be real much cheaper. Sorry, Eric.
Well, I just wanted to add to what Rick said in his introduction to Carol. Carol is a dear friend and colleague who is considered the world leader in the study of the normal aging brain and one of the preeminent neuroscientists in the world. Some of her previous accomplishments have been breathtaking, and we're very excited about this new, extremely ambitious and extremely important initiative.
So I had a comment and a question. I happened to be at the TGen board meeting yesterday, and they talked about this grant because of Matt Hundelman's involvement, but not in detail, but the other thing that they mentioned was this is the largest grant ever given by the National Institute of Aging in dollar amount.
It is. So, I mean, there are 33 Alzheimer's centers, but this one is the only sort of center on normative aging, and it's more than us. It's a big responsibility, you know. We really have to do something. We are doing something. So I think it'll pay off. But yes, I know they've really invested in us.
That's great. So the question I was curious about the sweat analysis, what kinds of things it's really very interesting.
Yes, they're able with mass spec to pick up. So you just Esther Sternberg and Ray Runyon have pioneered this, and actually their development of this method is supported by DARPA. If you believe that. And, but they've gotten really far along and they're able to detect more and more molecules. And the more molecules you detect, you put together pathway analysis and so forth, and you can tell what may be going right or wrong for the person. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be really rich in dimensionality, and that we might be able to send these beads out is to everybody that we test is really exciting. So he's doing tests of that now.
Thank you. Go, let somebody else go.
Excuse me?
I have another question, but I'll wait for somebody else to ask one.
Oh, okay. Well, I had a couple of questions as well, if I could. In looking at the mine crown map that you showed, and then looking at the in-person testing centers, I could certainly understand the rationale given the demographic breakdown of those areas, but there did seem to be a big void in the upper Midwest and Pacific Northwest. And I'm just wondering whether there's any thought given to, more geographic representation.
Well, it's partly, part of the dot density is due to actual population density. So there will be different densities because there's fewer people. But with respect to our recruiting strategies, you just pinpointed an important approach. Mattis and the recruitment corps is looking at those less dense areas and are doing targeted advertising and recruiting in those areas. And some of those areas are mostly non-Hispanic white. The men are always less responsive to web-based testing. And so we've got to up our game with men. We've got to up our game, Asians, both male and female, that's the only category that has equal male and female test takers, which was sort of interesting. But anyway, all other categories. But so we have a lot of work to do with people, say, in their 50s and so forth, who are really busy, I guess, and get more of those individuals to participate. It's the younger ones. I don't know why we get pretty good representation. Maybe they're just used to doing web tests and kind of get into it. But the older individuals are interested in their memories, probably. So they're probably taking it. So we are working hard to fill in those spots.
I have a related question. One thing I didn't hear you mention, but I'm sure you've got it factored in there, is socioeconomic status and what an impact that has in terms as essentially a confounder with some of the demographic groups you talked about.
So Matt has done a lovely job of being able to show that we have all levels of socioeconomic status represented and in the proportions that exist across the United States. So he's done careful analysis of that. So we think we've got it on socioeconomic status, but we have plans for, you may know Cecilia Rosales here at the UA. She's an epidemiologist who's in Phoenix. Anyway, she is working with the All of Us project, and she has these vans that she drives around and stuff. So we're thinking if we think that need to fill in lower SES and more rural areas more, we may need to go out with vans to ask people to take the Minecraft test, essentially. That's another strategy. So we'll be monitoring all race ethnicities, all the socioeconomic status, the gender balance, all of this stuff. And geographic balance, and then targeting those places that we're still deficient, and as we roll forward.
Great. Dave, you had another question you want to ask?
I did, yes. So that fourth aim or fourth core, I'll just call it data analysis. I mean, it makes sense to me that that's a big deal and a key to success. Can you say some more about how that factors in?
So Nick Shork I still am pinching myself that he said yes to lead this, because from what I gather, and I'm not an informatician or a machine learning person and so forth, I know something about it, but he is one of the world leaders in this technology to make sense of integrating complex, hugely complex, enormous data sets and modeling in meaningful ways to try to do what we need, dimensionality reduce. And how I kind of know that this is probably correct, that he is the world's leader, is because National Institute on Aging said, program officers, we had 4 of them lined up, and they said, well, we might not have thought that you could ever achieve your goals in Project 4, but with Nick Shork, you probably can. You know? So we are so lucky to have Nick at TGen, he commutes between San Diego and TGen, to do this, and he is ready to go. He's already published something on this for this project for PAN. So I think he's ready to get our data and to make sense of it. And he's got a team that is really incredible. So I can't explain to you about the machine learning rules and so forth, but he is using really the latest approaches to make sense of harmonizing, integrating, and making predictions for us of those variables that are going to be the most important to target for intervention strategies for the next 5-year grant.
Wonderful. Mary.
Dr. Barnes, that was wonderful. Can I ask just about the process you used to actually put this consortium together? And really, I mean, if it's 11,000 pages, like how did you bring people together, like think through the strategy? And I mean, this is an enormous complex group.
I wish I could give you a really complicated that I had the strategic design. My first goal was to get the best people I could, was to get friends, was to get people who I know work well together with others, and ask them. And I can't tell you that all of them said yes immediately without, well, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard, you know, like, who would give you money to do this? It's going to take a lot. And I knew most of the individuals, or at least met them, and I was persistent in getting commitments for various deadlines. And I really have to hand it to my executive committee, which is Lee Ryan, Meredith Hay, Matt Humpelman, Robbie Brinton, and I. We sat cloistered, rewriting sometimes, I mean, the really complex, you know, some of the data science stuff and so forth, cores. We sat locked in rooms for 2 days at a time at some hotel remote that none of us could be in the office, you know, and just revised. And in the end, it was me and Luann Snyder, who is now retired, and one other person who was helping. Yvette Bola wasn't on board yet, but she's our program manager. She's spectacular. So in the end, it was just us going through it page by page and making sure that all the financials, everything were there. So it takes real commitment, and if there's something my personality is, it's determined. I think persistent, and I still can't believe we got it, but we did. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. I think we probably consumed Carol at this point. I think we can ask questions until tomorrow, but I think perhaps we should start to wrap things up. And thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and great discussion as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Just curious.
Really, really.
It's nice when we know someone, we know somebody.
We talk about it kind of thing all the time.
Plus, you saw the guy come in for the investment. Yeah, they booted him.
Here
And now they can't get
is just really joyful.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
We're gonna try to figure out ways to capture that. It's really sad what you're saying there.
Assume there's an art form doing it.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Really,
Wonderful.
thank you.
As a fan person, I really liked it. I mean, I got it when I first did.
That's good. Yeah, I wanted to encourage people to get in, and if they fell off,
I could see why, if you were one of the component players, you participate in the team that she was leading. Rick, not to hold us up, but I just wanted to make one comment because of what you said about Nick Short. In our board for the last 5 or 6 years, I would guess, I've heard a lot of concern at times, was TGen going to keep up with the technology that gets be outpaced by a bigger organization with more resources and this is based on their thinking about commercialization. It sort of all pulls together, but this is really one of the things that they've got people like Nick Short, and they've got the hardware and the software. And when they're talking about, they were talking about future of commercialization of some of their work, and they sold this big Cheyenne lab for $100 million recently. But the secret sauce apparently are the algorithms that people like Nick Short create. That is, if somebody likes if somebody likes TGen's molecular profile better than a competitor's, it isn't necessarily always because they have a biomarker that nobody else can measure, but it has to do with what's going on in the back technically. So it was interesting to get that validation that is a point of expertise. And I just bring that up because I think it's been a legitimate concern by this board, and it's very hard for us to know how to measure that or how it appears to others. But yesterday we were talking about thinking about commercialization, and they said, yeah, well, it's really the algorithms that we patent more than a biomarker test. It's so.
I mean, I certainly think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I think one of the real powers of this, when you have the kind of numbers that say Minecraft generates, you can perform all sorts of, deep learning based analyses and all these other, dimensions of knowledge. Yes, I've seen things where you could tell, whether a person was a male or a female based on their EKG.
Yeah.
You get a fundoscopic examination of them and you can tell how tall they are or something. I mean, it's really remarkable the things you can do if you know how.
Yeah.
That's not a cheap fund of knowledge to have. All right, well, we should probably move ahead. Let's see, Mary, I think you were going to update us on Ray Woosley.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, I just thought I'd bring to the board this morning, and I have talked with just a little update on the succession planning project that we've done with Ray. We've worked through the first phase of which really is the focus of Flinn at this point in time, is the due diligence phase of this project. The hope is that as I go through it this morning, there is a report that I can share more broadly for deeper reading, but really it's to seek your feedback and some guidance on should Flinn be engaged in a future phase, and what should we do to be helpful in that phase? In general, we know that succession planning, and I know people can say, well, why would Flinn get engaged in succession planning and, with leaders across the state, but it's done poorly in most cases. There's plenty of literature to show the sort of adverse effects or the negative effects of not doing it properly. And Flinn has made some significant investments in people like Ray Woosley over time. And you go, well, as they get to retirement, really, do we just want people to move away, not to be able to sort of grow and build on the sort of intellectual capital and unique knowledge assets that they've actually imparted to the state, that we should look at, make sure we know what they have done, but then also know how to move it forward so that we're building on something and not just letting it disappear. And Ray's personality is a personality that has, he has done a lot of work under the radar. But through this, this has been a super interesting project to work on, I have to tell you. Ray has done so much under the radar that people may not necessarily realize the value of the work that he has done. So what we did was we sort of looked at succession planning in general, just looking at the literature and talking to our consultants, and we had broken it out into a process, a 3-phase process: a due diligence phase, a plan development phase, and an implementation phase. Our focus really was, at this point, was on the due diligence, making just a general assessment of what assets Ray has, talking to stakeholders who are close to him. This includes the Dean at the College of Medicine, people he works with, and then other key thought leaders actually across the country who could put into context the value of his work. And that was really important, I think, from a Flinn perspective, because this is complicated work, this is a complicated area, and we really need those thought leaders to tell us how valuable it is. Obviously, a phase 2 would be a plan development, is based on what we've seen in the due diligence phase. Is there areas, or are there areas that Flinn should be engaged with? But really key for all of this was the fact that Ray is thinking seriously about retirement. He isn't that well, and he needed a little bit of help thinking through that process. So we have done what we set out to do. We provided him with some great consultants to work with him. He has been able to rally some of his key stakeholders, and now he has a document that allows him to sort of think through what his next step should be. But also in that process, we've had an opportunity to look at the data and to, get to a point where maybe we could make some decisions to be helpful to him. The benefit, it's not just for him. The benefit, though, would be what can we do for the community in Arizona as a whole with his knowledge. So the key goal of this was really to support a leader, a thought leader with a unique capacity in the biosciences, and to explore how to transfer their knowledge assets to a new leader who can continue to build these assets for the value of the Arizona community and beyond. Obviously, we all know Ray very well. The complexity for Ray is that he's associated with more than one organization. So therefore, as you look forward, you have to say, many players would have to be at the table in order to do something significant. So primarily, he is co-director of the Division of Clinical Data Analytics and Decision Support, a group that Flinn have funded. And he's professor of internal medicine at the College of Medicine, Phoenix. And there he works in collaboration with Steve Curry, that we know from Banner Health. But he is also the founder and CEO of the Arizona Center for Education and Research on Therapeutics, AZ-CERT. Okay, my clicker doesn't seem to be working.
Not working.
No. Sorry, guys. Okay, so for the due diligence phase, we engaged with Keta Bond, who's the president emerite of the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, and Elaine Gallen, PhD, a long-term colleague of Keta's, who had worked at the Doris Duke Foundation. These two ladies have deep knowledge of academic research and the translation of research, and they know very well the structures and management of academic research organizations. So Keta has operated at a very high level across multiple organizations in the medical research field, and knows what's needed relative to new leaders coming in. And then another aspect that they added was just an independent voice to validate the information for us and to develop plausible options that we could look at and see if there's some way of moving things forward. So the work that was completed included just an assessment of the current state of affairs. They engaged with Dr. Woosley and key stakeholders. Dr. Woosley was engaged at every aspect of this. We talked to him regularly. He was engaged with lots of telephone calls. So he's very happy with the outcome at this point in time. And then we engaged with thought leaders nationally to contextualize the importance of the work that is being done. These included Janet Woodcock at the FDA, Caroline Clancy at the Veterans, at the VA, David Platt, who's a bioinformatics expert at Harvard, and others. But they sort of gave us a good sense of the work that was being done, particularly with AZ CERT, because AZ CERT was originally funded by the AHRQ. And then we shared that report, the final report, back to Dr. Woosley to help him as he thinks through the next steps. Just a little background on AZ CERT. So AZ CERT is an independent 501c3. It has a strong scientific board of directors chaired by Klaus Romero, who's Chief Science Officer at the Critical Path Institute. AZ CERT targets physicians, public health, and the research community. And basically they curate drug safety information with an emphasis on drugs triggering heart arrhythmias. There's 400 drugs on that list. And they have a very detailed process of how they review the literature, how they review labeling, how they review information coming out of the FDA, and really putting it all together to develop tools that then physicians and others can use when they feel that they have patients who are at risk of adverse drug effects. And then these tools are readily available and widely available to the physician community, free to the public, etc. And they have started, so basically this organization was started with $12 million over a 12-year period. So again, a lot of money has already been invested in something. It's not something, that was done on $100,000. This is a well-invested, very organized group. The real question is what will happen in the future? And as I mentioned, Dr. Woosley really now has limited capacity to build on, continue building strong grants revenue to support the organization going forward. So some interesting facts. So as I mentioned, Ray tends to operate under the radar. Obviously with online tools, he's not super marketing, they're not marketing it to large audiences. I think this is just so interesting. He has 120,000 registered users who get updates regularly. And these are people who come in regularly. I think they have something like 5,000 hits a day. Of the people that are using it, 54% are healthcare givers or providers, 42% are the general public, and 4% are researchers. I would have expected the research community to be a little higher. And last year they had 2 million views. Very interestingly, Kata Bond, who lives in Virginia, or in Marshall, Virginia, was recently with her doctor. And he asked her what she was doing. She relayed the story of her work, working with Ray. And her doctor said, I use that website. And I have to, for me, that says an awful lot. You have a doctor in a rural town in Virginia, and he finds value in these tools. They have started looking at recently having a subscription model for their online platforms because organizations like Novartis actually use it. So there are those sort of seeds of opportunity, I would believe, moving forward, where this could be a really strong organization, really focused on the safe use of medicines. But it would need a new leader who really has both an entrepreneurial bent, but is super well experienced in this space. And then from a Flinn perspective, the consultant the report had 4 specific options for what could happen moving forward. 2 of them actually would have said AZCert should go and work, should be sold off. There is some opportunity for that. It should align with another organization up in Washington State. And then there were 2 options for staying in state. One where AZCert remains in Arizona as an independent nonprofit with a strong affiliation both with the College of Medicine and Banner. And then the other was that it integrates into the Critical Path Institute. That a new leader, if one was to come in, would need to absolutely have to have a joint appointment. And that's a complexity because now you need multiple people to agree to that. And it can also be quite a long process. And the leader must have a business acumen to be able to craft a vision for growing an organization that would have real impact, and also they'll be able to develop revenue streams that could in some way sustain it, so that it's not fully funded through grants. Although there are multiple opportunities for grants moving into this space. So the question is, Dr. Woosley now does require, he has the report, he's very happy with the report, but really the question maybe for Flynn is, what do we do with this new information? And is there a way we can be helpful in moving forward?
I have a question.
Yeah.
The AZCert, clearly it's not self-funding, but
Yeah.
is that the goal, or is it close or halfway or none?
Yeah, so I would say it's certainly not self-funding, and even the amount of funding that it has at the moment, really Ray and some of his family actually help do a lot of the background work, and everybody else is volunteer. So the opportunity is for it to have a very strong revenue stream or stream of grants coming in to support this work. This is an area of increasing importance, but absolutely it has to be able to generate be self-generating of revenue. So it sells licenses to the data.
Yeah.
It develops great online tools that are used often, and with that comes some funding, etc. It develops really good curricula that it puts out online. So the person who comes in would absolutely need to know how to build that.
But it's not close now.
Absolutely not, yeah.
Has there been any internal interest within AZCert from the board there or other people? I mean, it sounds like a beautiful product. It just needs to be sort of developed. I can't help thinking about Sean and
and then Sean can answer. Yeah, I would say, so what I would say is this first phase that we have looked at has really been gathering that information. I have talked to Klaus Romero, he's super enthusiastic, as are many of the people who are currently at the table, Dr. Fallon at the College of Medicine. Interestingly, the way universities and systems like this tend to operate, the Dean Reed wasn't that knowledgeable about AZCert, and yet, so this is why we really had to uncover a lot of information. So we haven't yet talked, or I haven't pursued going to talk to some people at the board. I think Jeff Jacobs is on the CPAT board. Rob Caleb, who has just, I think, maybe moved off the CPAT board and gone to the FDA. These are all people that one should now be speaking to say, how would you see, how could you see this moving out? And I think, Eric, relative to, Banner needs to be engaged. It really does need to have a hospital partner or medical partner really to be able to implement. And a lot of this feeds into the whole clinical decision support area. Cisco brought over Cerner, so there's an opportunity for actually looking at, how could Cisco not Cisco, Oracle brought over Cerner. Ray has a relationship with Oracle, yeah. So there's all of this, information flowing around, and I haven't talked to the board, and they obviously would have to be the drivers of the next steps. I mean, that's not a Flynn job, but we haven't got there.
I think some of the last discussions we had by email were like, what is the budget here and what's the investment thesis and stuff? I don't know if you've been able to tease that out of Ray and everything else, because I can't quite get my head around how big the operation is and what kind of, somebody were to invest in this and hire a new CEO and run this thing, what that ask is.
Yeah, well, I would say without, without delving too, I'd say as a rule of thumb, we'd be looking at about $1 million a year for 5 years to get it up and running. The person, so where would that fund come from? Dr. Fallon has maybe an opportunity to put some money into the recruitment, but you'd need many people to come to the table with some funds to make sure that you have the commitment of key organizations. So, but I would say as a general guide, we're looking at about $1 million a year for a 5-year period to enable a new leader to come on board and for them to build out a business plan and to begin to execute on it.
This is Eric. What Ray has brought to this picture is this national leadership role in understanding safety issues and drug interactions. And his contributions exemplified by CPATH have been great. I just worry that this needs an organizational champion.
Absolutely.
I believe that while Klaus and Mike are good guys, they can't drive it and can't be responsible for it. I would value Dr. Califf's and Janet Woodcock's views of what opportunities they might see somehow potentially related to FDA. But it does need an organizational champion. I think Flynn's best way to help is to, again, encourage individuals who are willing to take a risk, to own it and move it forward rather than doing it ourselves, my view. But
yeah, and Eric, I completely agree. I mean, this is not something Flynn can do. We can encourage maybe somebody else to do it. But if you were looking at potential champions within organizations, would you have any idea who might be a good one?
Again, one of the people who really impressed me an awful lot, who's again now commissioner of FDA, was Rob Califf, who established the Duke Research Institute and understands these issues well. I'd really love if we could somehow get a candid take from him on what the possibilities might be, and because it's a little head scratching without that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, then that actually is our final agenda item for Governance Committee. So by the power vested in me, I declare the meeting over, and we can then go to executive session. Very brief, Dave.
I'll be back here.
Yeah, right back here
Investment
for investment, yeah. So let you take a bio break.
Is this something Blue Cross would help with? Is it medicines or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. When I think about it, and Mary and I haven't had a chance to have a really good in-depth discussion on this yet. But I think about, and this may sound funny, but like the poison center at U of A. Or the decision support center. Two places where people call for information about.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's what you need. You need to plant it. I completely agree with Eric's comment. You need to plant it somewhere where there's an organization that will champion it.
Yeah.
Because trying to force feed it, and I'm sort of under the impression, I should turn this off, that it's been, kind of family.
Yeah.
It is for and my son.
I do not know.
That's my impression.
Okay.
I haven't.
No. I had no idea.
But nursery done by.
Yeah, sure.
That would-
That would block everybody else out. Okay, so then we should be fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Ray.
Is in the
Yeah.
They really don't have funds for this, but people like the core has funds and There's other streams. I have to go. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I keep saying, who are we missing? But now I know. there's people on-
We can talk later.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
I'll be here.
So really,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
nothing really major. I think that we've got, as far as nominations, right? People, everybody's that wanted to vet Julie,
Yeah, I think we're,
vetted her.
yeah, I think what's, our next step is getting the
Julie Baldwin,
report back.
we executed a background check with her permission. And when I checked last night, they've verified, credentials and verified credentials. Sorry, I feel like I'm yelling at you now.
No, my ears are going.
Okay, and they had not done the criminal piece, which I was thinking of doing a criminal check on Julie Baldwin
Yeah.
is an
Makes you laugh.
oxymoron.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that is in progress. We will probably have that today, in which case you could do an electronic vote. Everyone has met her, and I feel like we're in a pretty good state there. The one thing that I did want to do, and I take your guidance on this, I wanted to put a telephone call into Paul Keim. Just because he's always been the person that Flynn has supported so deeply at Northern Arizona University. And I wonder if he won't wonder why he was skipped over.
Are you the best person to do that? I agree.
I'm happy for anyone to do it other than me.
I'm also, I have some relationship with Paul, maybe only because we served on the scholars selection committee years ago and sort of, so if it's easier from the chair, I would think I'd make the call after the board has taken the vote, but before we call Julie.
Okay, I did put a call into him. We've not connected.
Oh, yeah.
but,
Okay. Well, if you want to.
Anyway, I just felt like it was a courtesy, and maybe I'm being too
No, I think
sensitive.
it's,
No.
I personally think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
Being honorable.
I think maybe.
And Julie's obviously a yes.
She's very interested, and yeah,
okay.
she's very
She-
interested.
yeah.
She's.
But I
thrilled
also think maybe your powder should stay dry and Dave should do it.
that- Okay, happy for that to happen.
You don't mind not making that call?
I don't feel like it's a difficult conversation, to
No,
be honest.
It's just giving them a heads up.
But I do feel like it's a courtesy.
Yeah, unless you thought, your ongoing relationship with him would benefit more from you making the call.
I don't have a feel for that, Steve. I like Dr. Keim. We've got a relationship. We've funded his research. I've spent time in his lab. We've had a meal together. I mean, so I feel, but I just, again, I just felt that somebody needed to say something
I think that's.
to him.
So on ALPA, we're still
We
well,
have a-
well, by the way, let's stay on
Okay.
Julie for a moment. So was everybody comfortable, assuming that the criminal report comes back clean, that we go ahead and do this electronically? Our next board meeting is when?
June.
Yeah. So the only reason to perhaps keep it until June is in case anything else surfaces or people just would feel better having an in-person discussion before we vote and try to just resurrect and remind ourselves why we're so enthusiastic about it. I'm okay doing it by unanimous
I think
consent.
we vetted her pretty thoroughly, as far as I understand, and I think that everybody has expressed positive remarks, and we have discussed her credentials, multiple
Yeah.
times. So people have multiple bites at the apple.
I agree. I just
So
want to
I
make sure
feel
we ask
comfortable with
again.
a vote for that. I mean, does that make, I'd be
And
curious.
that's our retreat. So, I think if they're going to join the board to participate in the retreat where we
I
talk,
agree. That would be
strategy.
That
my
would be a good
preference.
idea.
that would be a good idea.
Okay.
Anybody else? Drew, Heidi, Eric, any concerns about if the background check goes, doing a electronic vote?
I'm fine.
Totally
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
Only other thing, just so I'll feel better by raising, making sure there's no one else we think we should check with that would have meaningful information on Julie?
I don't think
Or
so.
would just be repeating, adding to the chorus of,
I
Dr.
think we've
Ryman has
vetted it.
done a nice
Yeah.
check for us.
Yeah,
you said what?
Dr. Ryman has already done a nice check for us
Okay,
with a colleague of his.
okay. Well, good, then I think, will you organize the
Yes.
unanimous written
Yes.
consent?
I will wait for the background check to be finalized. Dave will put in a call to Paul Kime.
Yep.
And then we'll send out an electronic resolution.
Good. And then on ALPA, my understanding is we're still trying to make connections with several board members who haven't been able to meet her, correct?
And we have that scheduled. There's we've decided to do it Zoom because there was no way.
Okay,
And so that's coming up shortly, and that will have everyone who has wanted to meet with her, and we'll
would
have.
that timing preclude us then from doing the same thing?
I don't think it precludes us. I think we can still do that, the same
Yeah.
thing.
Although as long as people are here, we ought to at least get a FaceTime sense of those who have met ALPA. Are you as enthusiastic about bringing her to the board as early as possible?
Drew is the only one up there who has met her,
Who hasn't?
who has.
Yeah, oh, okay,
so Heidi and Eric haven't had contact. with her.
okay, well then,
And Rick
Sean
has not
hasn't,
been able
so
to meet her.
Rick
Sean
hasn't.
hasn't.
oh,
Okay,
well,
so we'll-
we got work to do then.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
yeah,
well, that may make it hard to do it.
yeah. We don't want, we'll just see we'll see where we are after that, after the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, do the Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought she was terrific.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah, I think it'd be terrific if we could get her in the same June meeting.
So we'll-
I don't think it should take long.
yeah,
Not having met her yet. it seems to me.
okay. So we'll hold that open if we don't feel like we're rushing it, but we feel like we vetted her. I think it's more, for me, it's more about board members meeting or deciding, forming them. And then if somebody, I don't need more data on her personally, but if people meet her and they feel like they have questions, then we'll.
well,
get
we
those
can always
answered.
do a Zoom meeting too.
Yeah, we can.
Okay,
All right. The only other thing I'll tell you is, I keep talking about the TGN board meeting yesterday, but I'll tell you, the other thing is they're working on just because we're interested in the health of the organization, their success. They are working on a major strategic plan. As part of that, they will be putting more thought and effort into successfully commercializing things. So, I mean, they are still an academic research organization. They're still doing that, but they will try to be thoughtful about how they can also benefit from their best ideas. So
Dave, you had asked me to place in the executive session folder, the Flynn holidays.
oh yes, the Flynn holidays. So I'd forgotten completely about that. Did anybody see that?
I didn't look at it, sorry.
So the question came up from Tammy.
Did you see that? I was wondering if it was a mistake.
No. So the question that came up from Tammy was whether we should add Juneteenth as a
I see.
holiday.
I see.
And then, so I thought, well, let's look at what our current holidays are and compare ourselves with other foundations.
There we are.
So that's what that document shows. It does show that we have two flexible holidays, right? So if somebody wants to honor Juneteenth or Columbus Day, a holiday that we don't give,
We don't even call it that anymore, Dave.
well, whatever.
Yeah.
What, how do you mean Columbus Day, or you mean
Yeah, Columbus Day.
whatever, whatever they call it.
Okay.
I don't really care.
Yeah.
But the point of it is you've got two discretionary holidays already.
Right.
So,
And you can choose
yeah,
that
For sure.
it would include.
Yeah, our proposal to Dave was let's drop President's Day and pick up Juneteenth. But if you guys want to leave it the way it is, that's fine. I mean, it's not
My recommendation would be to stick with a small core and leave a few floaters. That's what we do in all of our companies.
Yeah.
Well, let people pick their floater, 2 or 3, Because then we have so many holidays. If you're gonna close on everything, how are you gonna discriminate between one or two? You'd say, hey, we're gonna do 10 days off on the holidays or 11.
Yeah.
We'll do 7 that we do and then the rest can float. That's mine. But I'm not looking at other foundations. I'll do that, but our company-
Tammy, just quick question. Is Martin Luther King Day a holiday today or?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay.
It's not a floater.
It's not a floater. Got it.
Yeah, we have 8 holidays, Heidi, today.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I can. I'll look
Not
at
a problem, not a problem. So,
And we look good compared to others.
Yeah.
Don't have a National Donut Day.
Oh, that's one of your floaters. That was had a limited,
I would prefer official recognition.
Yeah.
That's okay.
all right. So leave as is. Does anybody feel strongly that we should make Juneteenth a holiday or just use the floaters? I've heard a sentiment for floaters. Okay,
I'm indifferent.
all right. Good, that concludes the session. Did you have a comment, Rick?
Well, no, I was leaning towards what Tammy had said, swapping President's Day for Juneteenth. I'm just looking at the distribution, but I mean, what do I know? This is not my background.
Which ones are national holidays that were banks closed?
Presidents?
MLK, President's Memorial, Juneteenth, Independence, Labor, Veterans, Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Why don't we just leave it as is and revisit it whenever the spirit moves us?
You know, my concern would be Juneteenth is if the other organizations decided to make a change, then we would be an outlier.
And we're right in the middle right now, right?
Right.
ACF and Vitalist have embraced Juneteenth. And it hasn't been discussed in the other places yet. So
I haven't, I heard mild talk about it. I agree. Let's just wait. See if it becomes more popular.
right.
We're not doing it, but Harry can be a pill, so.
I'll just make a comment just from the private sector that there are quite a few companies that are embracing it, not from just comparing foundations, but from a private companies. They are embracing the Juneteenth holiday as well, just anecdotally as another data point.
Thank you. What about the total number of holidays? We're within the mark, I guess, so it'd be swapping one.
You could swap one or you could add a floater. I mean, is another suggestion.
On a holiday that's official, we just closed our business. Is that versus a floater, you're open.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, in my own view, is that it's changed a bit with the way we're working today and we'll continue to work. Businesses are open all the time now. So it used to align with closing your doors and the banks are closed and you couldn't do business and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more flexibility people are taking with their.
Yeah. And we're also closed between Christmas and New Year's. Part of that's
Oh, we
because
are?
of,
Good point. Oh, yeah,
yeah, we are.
yeah.
Every foundation is except ACF. Okay, so that's not unique.
No, not to our foundation.
Right.
But how is it in the business world?
It depends on what your business is, right?
Yeah.
We used to shut down the power plants during that.
Yeah.
No wonder our Christmas lights didn't work.
Is that true? I was like, everything you tell me, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you count those days as holidays or how do we count?
We don't. We're closed those days. I mean, I don't know how Lisa officially.
Do we have people that are supposed to be on at 9?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll
yeah.
leave as is,
Thank
but
you.
we can revisit it in 6 months or so.
In 6 months.
Is that comfortable? Year? I don't care.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I mean, I don't mind revisiting again. I just grab 6 months. I don't care.
I'll get, I saw.
Awesome.
I think you're always gonna have to have floaters because there's more holidays and probably,
Oh, yeah.
unless we want to turn into France.
That's good.
You know, it's hard because when you're a physician, you take 4, maybe 5, period.
Yeah, you can't.
Thanksgiving, Christmas, Labor Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July. That's it. And you work the rest of the time.
And you could go, I mean,
And anything else counts as vacation.
I've seen some people go down, only go like 5.
Yeah.
And float 4 more because there's so many other holidays that.
Are we just staying on this line or?
Yeah.
I'm
No,
headed
we're not
off.
taking a
Thanks,
break. Yeah.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
How you doing?
Hi, Cameron. Cameron, I walked right by you and said hello. Steve Wheeler. Good to see you again. Thank you.
Hey, Karen, Dave Goblin. Hi, good to see you again. Take care. Have a seat.
It's just open seating.
Open seating.
It's like Southwest Airlines.
Yeah. Like Southwestern Airlines, yeah.
It's very strong. It is. That's why I'm switching to water. My heart's going to.
Hey, didn't see you. I thought you were. You know, I had a change of plans. I couldn't miss seeing you guys.
Yeah, good to see you.
So 11.
We're all a lot smarter. And he said it did. It's great.
And Cambridge is on the call.
Oh, good.
And then we
So,
can just, you want to sit down here, right? Because this is where the cameras.
If you need, open sitting view, you can do that. If not.
Rose, I'll be able to be here for the first 30 minutes.
Okay, well, that'll be good then. That's good.
Yeah, I think the whole room is fine because the nice thing is we've all been together enough that even though Rose and I will be tiny, Rose is still huge. The boss. We'll be tiny on the screen, but you're still big.
I thank you very much.
Without sounding the wrong way.
Okay, so
I know.
Like, what do you mean? It's good.
Hi, good. We're going to Maui Friday with the kids. I know.
How could you do that?
Because Jenny and Chris, our kids wanted to go there instead of the Big Island. Are we bringing in Cambridge?
Yeah, Matt's gonna let them in right now.
We're good to go.
By the way.
Hello there.
Hi,
How are you?
we're great. We're great.
Hi.
So I think we're all here and we're ready. Good morning.
Good morning. So we do have Jim joining us as a call-in this morning. I will check in with him. I know we had, asked for a few minutes in the beginning, so he's probably supposed to join in about a minute or two. But as you can see, we put a lot of the questions into some 3 broad groups to start the discussion. Of course, even since the materials have gone out, markets have continued to be very interesting for all of us. So I'm sure this will be a very interesting conversation.
Of course.
We'll just check in on them.
Matt, did you start recording?
There we go.
Good morning. I think he's on, Natalie.
I am. This is
Good morning. Hi, Jim.
sorry to be a little late, but we were having a little trouble figuring out how to get on.
Confirm that they can see you.
Can you see me okay?
No.
We don't see you, Jim.
Okay,
Okay.
that's
well,
okay. We can fix that.
We can try. I'm getting some help here, as you can see. No, you can't
You
see.
can't see. Okay.
Well, we can
There
hear
we
you.
go. There we go. There we go. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Now you see me and Jim. Have fun, y'all.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all for dealing with my having trouble getting started here.
Well, Jim, we hadn't really started. Everyone was getting settled, and I was just, opening up and, saying that we've shared the questions with you. We tried to put them in kind of 3 broad categories, but happy to take this time with the committee in any way that Rose and the committee and Stacy would find most beneficial. A lot is going on in the markets. There's a lot of questions. Where do we go from here? We're all anxiously awaiting to see what the Fed is going to do this afternoon. A lot of topics that we've asked you to address and I know are on people's minds. Yeah, unless, Rose, Stacy, others, you have any, specific things that you'd like Jim to address first, I'll turn it over to him and maybe go through some of the questions that were asked.
I think let's focus on the questions rather than the charts, because that's obviously what everybody is, I think we covered everything in our questions.
Perfect. Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Let me kind of go. I've gone through this, obviously, both the different picture things here, but also obviously the questions. And I can go right down the question list, starting with the first one, inflation terminal rates. Window for not getting a recession or whatever. The short of it is that at least my view is, and I think and let me say that I'm reflecting Cambridge's views on most of these things. I may have a push more in one direction than another direction on some things, but basically it's Cambridge stuff. But essentially, I think the Fed is obviously trying to not have things, in their view, get out of control, and hence have been pushing rates up. Having said that, my best guess, and I think ours as a firm's best guess, is that they're not going to just keep going up. They're going to if things are getting out of control in terms of slowing down the restart of the US and the world, everything, I think the Fed will slow down pushing rates up. We'll see today, actually, they're either doing it right now or they're going to do it, whatever they're going to do now soon. But the Fed, particularly these Fed members, they're people that are, have a good sense of the past and how to avoid problems. And so I don't see this as something, I see what they're doing as what they should be doing, but I don't see necessarily, whatever it was, eight rises in rates this year, because at the same time, there's the world economy, there's the US economy. There are all these things that are going on, which, for anyone who's, a person who's dealt with these kinds of issues before, and all of these, the Fed and, a lot of people in this administration have dealt with these things before. I don't think they're going to sort of do something particularly stupid. So questions or thoughts, other thoughts on that? Can people hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're taking notes. And did you want to, you're looking at me. Cameron.
Well, I guess what's different about this time would be the shrinking of the balance sheet as well. And that has not been done, I believe, since just post-World War II. So I'm wondering how that factors into your thinking relative to the markets and the real economy.
I would come back to more or less the same thing, which is I think the Fed and this government now, when we start talking about Trump, if he gets back in, all bets are off is the way that I put it. But with this government, I don't think that we will, in any particular way, including the one that you just asked about, I don't think it's likely that they're going to do something that is in afterwards we would characterize as stupid, because it caused this problem of that. I think this is, a thoughtful group that has, a lot of experience. And I think the government, the people in our government now, I think are, competent and reasonably thoughtful people. And as I say, if you get Trump, and if I'm offending somebody about Trump, but I'm sorry for that. But my view is that Trump has been, he's just, and I've let me just say, I've dealt with him personally a couple of times, 3 or 4 times over the last 15 or 20 years. Just as an aside, he was in New York City. He was one of the most hated people on things like you all are part of here, because he would do crazy things, and other people on oversight on any kind of public kind of thing just couldn't stand him, because he always was unpredictable and self-reliant and whatever. And so anyway, I don't think, absent his being back in the picture, which may happen, I don't see these things going on in a stupid way. Hopefully that's helpful. Other questions on this?
Well, just going on, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. This is Cameron Black that you were just speaking with. He's a senior and finance guy and treasurer of Blue Cross, and he's a new member of our committee. You hadn't met him before. On the screen is Heidi Janenga, a new trustee, so new board member for us. So, and otherwise you see the same old crowd. But can we talk about recession risks, or if you see one, when you would see one, please?
What I would say is on recession risk in the United States, I think for the next year or the next couple of years, I think it's fairly unlikely, because I think the Fed and the government will take actions, in terms of mortgage rates and housing market and all the things outlined here. They will do things in a way which I think will there may be effects on mortgage rates or housing market or whatever, but we don't see it as likely. Now, again, you get 3 years out, and you have a different kind of, could have a very different risk kind of context. But in the current year, let's say, even 2 years, I think it's unlikely to be an issue, because of the sensibleness of the people that are making the decisions. And I should say on the next thing here, which is recession in the U.S., I think very unlikely in the next 4 years, really, for the same thing I've been broadly saying. And on the midterm elections, I think there's significant risk there because, again, there are certainly some of the people on the Republican side of the aisle who have a different view on a lot of different things than I and most investors would have. And it's conceivable that if you got the Senate and the House going the other way, it's conceivable that you would have some policies that could cause problems, just because they could be extreme, and that could cause problems. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's some risk, but I don't think it's likely. But anyway, it's something certainly to watch. The other question, should I go on to the Russian and situation and the effect of that and so on?
Yes, please. And this is Rose again, because I have to tell you, I'm, I am nervous about non-US equities. So that would be really, I'd appreciate that, please.
Sure. The way that I would put it, and again, we now are not telling our clients to eliminate or reduce non-US equities. We are, or US equities for that matter, we are and have been steadily telling them to rebalance if they're above their targets. And hopefully you all have done some of that, because there have been some times in the last 18 months where things you could easily have been above what your target was. But in general, we have felt like one should be at one's target. Now there's plenty of risk in that, both in the U.S. and investing in the U.S., but also in other kind of places. Having said that, most of our kind of clients, if they're investing in other places, they're investing in Europe, or at least some of the European companies, or European places. And so those, are, I think in general, particularly the European ones, are in general sensible in what they're doing. And so we have not felt like, there's risk obviously there, but we've not felt like it was one that should keep people out of making, the investments in those markets, and the best in the US, and the best companies they or their managers can find. And it's back to the view that now, having said that, things go up in the market and you're above your target, we would say rebalance and come back down, because it's not a time that you want to be twice or even 50% above your target. So, that would be our view on Russia. On Russia itself, let me just say that I've actually spent some time in Russia in the past, and I've spent a lot of time all around the world, over the, actually it's now 65, 70, a long time that I've been working in this field. But the Russia is unto itself, is the way that I would put it. And, they're doing this kind of thing. They've done many similar things that the rest of the world, and certainly myself, would find as stupid and horrible and, whatever. Having said that, in this case, I don't think China is going to, get into this at all, because Chinese government, and also what's happening in China right now in terms of the pandemic coming back and whatever, I think makes it very unlikely that China is going to somehow line themselves up with Russia and, be part what Russia is doing now. And so, it's a problem and it's awful. But I think that the US, but the world in general is doing the right things to make it unlikely that this is going to totally, blow up and become a world issue. Now, having said that, I'm not very knowledgeable about how easy it would be for Russia to start sending, things up in the air to blow up the US or Europe or whatever. And so it's conceivable, because they're so crazy in what they're doing, that there may be something they could do that could make this escalate this in an enormous way. But short of that, I think what they're doing is not going to be, ultimately very helpful to them. Because if they get some parts of they're trying to take away, that might be good from their point of view. But they're not going to succeed enough to, and they're going to, in my opinion, quit doing it at some point if they can figure out a way to do it and not look as stupid as I think they could look if they keep going on this much more. In any questions on any of that?
Anyone? No, because specifically for me, I am worried about recession in Germany. And maybe you're not. And I get it that I know it's an endowment. I know we're long-term investors, but I can't help but just really worry about the impacts of oil and natural gas to Germany. Have you thought anything specifically about Germany or anything like that?
We in general, I would say we think about Europe all the time, and and we certainly have spent time on Germany. I should say I was an exchange student in Germany many years ago, before most of you all were born, and so I know Germany very well, although I don't speak German as well as I should speak it. But what I would say is that while Germany has issues these days that they didn't used to have, particularly issues with regard to people of other people from other locations in the world being there, and those people maybe not having the same view as a German, normal kind of Germans, and causing some issues. But in general, I think Germany, I don't know much about the new person running it. The predecessor was obviously, a very thoughtful person, and Germany has done relatively well over, the last 10, 15, 20 years. And so I don't think we would be as concerned as you might be on it, just because the way to put it is that there's Germany, a lot of smart people in government, and decent, sort of relationships among different types of people in Germany in general. And you're not going to do something, I think, stupid, and they will deal with the things that they need to do to have the right amount of whatever it is they need in Germany. So it doesn't, and I would say, I'd have the same view on the UK or on France. And actually, I think the French election was a good thing, because he's not a great person, but he's better than the other choice.
Just a trouble. Okay, thank you.
Yep, not at all. So other ones, I'm kind of going down the list. Other ones in the number 2 section that we haven't talked about enough.
Anybody? No, go on.
And then the last thing, moves by Russia and so on, permanently changing free trade and whatever. I don't think that's likely because I think Russia is so out there, and I don't think it's in the interest of almost any other country other than ones that Russia would pull into the Russian kind of thing. And so I don't see it as, and we don't see it as something that is likely, to be worse than, the general thing that we're dealing with now, which is what Russia is doing, which, as I say, I think will gradually go away because I think it's not a wise thing that they're, doing now. In terms of the last things here, overweighting U.S., I wouldn't overweight U.S. for the reasons I said. If one was over one's target, I'd rebalance, and I would other states. The China thing, though, let me say the China thing is it's a risk, and it's a risk, I think, because while China as a country has been very, in general, very good at doing wise things for itself in terms of things like dealing with pandemic and these kinds of things in general. Having said that, this recent situation where they suddenly are having a lot of people in parts of China with very, with pandemic kind of stuff, with, serious, things that that is affecting them. And that could really, things could go off the ramp there. And so it's worrisome, I think. Having said that, I think it lessens the fact that they're, trying to deal with the fact that many of their people in the country are now having problems with the stuff that, their health. I think it's likely to make them, more aligned with the U.S. and the U.S. more aligned with trying to help them than otherwise. And so I don't see it as them as doing something stupid now, because I think, in general, their government is relatively, vis-a-vis their own situations, I think, does a relatively good job at doing what they're doing. And so I see it as a problem because, you could have a lot of people dying there, and that could have a lot of negative things, but I don't see it so much as a problem of them doing something stupid in terms of running the country, because I don't think this group or China in general, falls into that category anymore. They have been in that category in the past, but I don't think they're there now. Let me just say in broad terms, though, our view is that this is obviously a time where there are risks. And so our view and your view, could change here in this period of time. But in general, our view has been investing in a normal way in US, non-US, at targets that one are reasonable targets for your fund is okay. Having said that, if you go over your targets, rebalance, and some people don't do that, but we would have a strong view in this context, rebalance, and also be thoughtful in all the other things that you're doing. Actually, let me just mention, and then I'll stop because you all have a lot of more important things to talk about. There is one thing that in general, I would say we have concerns about, and we're speaking to clients about doing something different than some of them are doing. And essentially it is that the venture capital in the US and the world, China particularly, has done so well over the last 10, 11 years, but really over the last 25, 30 years, a long period of time, that some of our clients now have more than 50% of their whole portfolio, portfolio invested in venture. And as managers raise more money, some of them have been putting in too much money in our view. And so I would be cautious about that. Numbers from our point of view depends a lot on the individual institution, but in the, let's say 10%, 25% are ones that we think are depending on the institution and all the kind of normal things that are reasonable numbers, but somewhere above 25% of the portfolio and venture kind of things is way too much in our view. And so we would be advocating not doing that. It's been a great area. We've been, as you all know, we've really pushed this now since we started as a company. But at the same time, you can do too much of a good thing. So any other questions or thoughts or whatever?
Well, then how about hedge funds? So where would you, so hedge funds and debt, Jim, because there's so far there's been no place to hide in fixed income.
Right. On the hedge fund side, we continue to want have our clients continue to have hedge funds in their portfolio. It's obviously been a tougher period because there have been fewer managers really doing consistently well in the hedge fund world, and there are a number that have done very poorly. Having said that, we think it's probably the best diversifier in reasonable amounts that one can, broad diversifier, and so something in the 10 to let's say 15, 18% in hedge funds are numbers that we think are reasonable numbers. Above that is not reasonable. Below that it's okay, but if you get down to 5%, it doesn't have any utility to it. But we continue to have a view on relatively positive view on hedge funds.
And then how about fixed incomes in general?
Yeah, fixed incomes, rates are going to go up. And so one should understand that. And so being cautious, being willing to take less of a return currently in order to avoid the risks of rates going up is the strategy that I think we would be positive on. Having said that, if you look, most of our clients have relatively small fixed income portfolios these days. If you look at it, most of them are not above 10%, and that's been for a lot of reasons. And so we're not big, and particularly now rates have gone up, they're going to go up. And so we're not a big proponent of, particularly of long fixed income bets, and haven't been a fan of long fixed income bets because we're in a period of time where there is risk in all these things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, our Cambridge team has us pretty short and pretty small, so that's been perfect. Anybody else? Scott, do you want to just say hello to your old friend?
Hey, Jill, how are you?
It is great to, I don't know that I see you actually, because I'm looking around. Oh, there you are. Oh, there you are. You were right by me, but great to see you, and great to see that you're still there with the committee.
You bet.
They fired me, then they hired me back.
Well, that's good. I'm having some of the same issue at Cambridge Associates. You know, your colleagues, your fellow, you know, investors there. Don't let them fire me because I love what I do, and actually, let me just say that I've worked with you all from time to time for a very long period of time. You're a fantastic group, and you're just epitome of what makes me want to continue to do what I do, which is great, you know, good things for the world that you're doing, and great, you know, efforts at you know, getting your money to be able to do those things. So I'm thrilled that we work with you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Sean, did you?
We're gonna go to globalization next, right?
There's another question you want to ask?
No, it was, I think we'll cover it when we go to the third topic.
Well, he was on that. So
You just covered, yeah.
do you want to clarify what you want?
Well, I guess I was hoping to learn a little bit more about what your thought was long-term with respect to structural changes then with like investment decisions being made by manufacturing companies and everything else. Like in our sector in healthcare, nobody in their right mind is looking at China to do any manufacturing. And people are talking about consciously trying to do stuff in the United States, drug supply, everything like that. So I just wondering how your view is on that from the long run.
What I would say on that in the long run is that China, you know, will be there and will be a factor in the long run. Having said that, excuse me, in the short run,
I know.
you know, you know, when a country or, you know, any subset of you know, countries and those kinds of things, you know, is off in a problem area, you know, the kind of thing that you just said, you know, those are wise things to do. But in the long term, you know, we continue to see China as, you know, a major force in the world, and in general, we see China as, you know, a relatively well-run country. You know, they make mistakes, we make mistakes, but in general, they've been relatively well-run. And so this is not a time for a big bet on China. That may come, but it's not a time to just throw China out, in our view.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure, and you have a great team there from our shop working, and so you know, get going on it. Okay.
Thank you. We took more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Yep.
We'll follow up shortly.
Yep.
Okay, I'll take a stop there and see if, you know, there's anything there that you guys want to explore. Looks like Jim's still trying to figure out
how to leave.
There we go. Well, it's still there in the background, but
don't worry.
Jim, we still hear you.
I'm trying to turn it off.
Remove. Bye. All right.
We can help them. We're got a helping hand.
Yeah.
We're givers.
All right, Matt. Well, I think we should proceed along to the agenda, Natalie.
Absolutely. So we'll move on to performance. And, you know, Kim will address, you know, performance mostly through March, but, you know, we recognize that April was another really tough month, both in equities and in bonds. So to the extent that we've gotten any manager returns in, we'll, you know, try to highlight that, as well as where there's been a few spots of positive activity in the portfolio, you know, and then again, address any questions as they go up through the performance.
Okay, thanks, Natalie, and hi, everyone. Good to see you all. I'll skip the market and just get into performance. Would you like us to put the slides up on the screen, or does that make it worse? I'm never sure in the hybrid meetings what's more helpful.
Sorry?
I kind of like them.
Yeah, why don't you put them up on the screen?
Okay.
We can hear you and everyone can have the same visual. And also we can see exactly what you're speaking to.
Okay, perfect. So I'll start on page 19. Thanks, Tyrus, for bringing that up. And you can see on the top left, the Flynn's portfolio performance through the end of March. So this is Q1 data, and the private investments are still as of September, just as a reminder there. And in the first quarter, the portfolio was down 4.3%, roughly in line with the benchmark, and actually better than a number of portfolios that I've seen recently, even though we don't like to see the negative numbers. Like Rose said, there weren't many places to hide in the first quarter with global equities and bonds declining. Some of the more positive areas were, of course, real assets and energy related assets, and our hedge funds diversifiers portfolio as well was one of our better performing asset classes. So it brought the value of the portfolio to about $260 million as of the end of March. So taking a look at our asset allocations versus our targets, just slightly overweight public equity, which was not a huge driver of performance. Slightly underweight hedge funds for one of the reasons being that we are in the process of making a recommendation, which Michael will talk to later today. We liquidated one hedge fund, Tidewarn, and we're waiting for the proceeds from that fund. So that caused us to be temporarily underweight, but looking to bring that a bit closer to target with today's recommendation. Slight overweight in real assets, in part thanks to the performance of that part of the portfolio this quarter. And then bonds and cash are about at target if you look at those holistically. So not much in the way of deviations from target to note. In terms of performance drivers for the first quarter, thanks, Tyrus. You can see in orange here is the lone true bright spot in the portfolio where our real assets manager principal diversified real assets outperformed the rest of the universe, slightly behind the benchmark there, but still definitely glad that we kept that in the portfolio as an inflation sensitive asset class. It certainly helped now. Again, not a huge allocation, about 5.7% of the portfolio, but glad to have that positive boost to performance in this market where anything growth related sold off significantly, and fixed income really wasn't very helpful either, as rates are continuing to get pushed up, as Jim discussed earlier. Looking at some of the drivers of the equity market performance, emerging markets somewhat naturally were the weakest asset class for the quarter, down just over 10%. We did have some China exposure and some Russia exposure that obviously didn't help. However, at this point, our Russia exposure is effectively zero. So that is out of the portfolio to the extent that it was there. And we expect that to be the case going forward as well.
So, Kim?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Emerging markets, obviously I'm concerned about. So I want to talk about later on the book. You don't have to go there, Tyrus, but the City of London has, where are my notes? City of London has 25% in China. What is the benchmark weight for China?
Yeah, it's around, it's been around 30% of EM. I can find a more specific number, but that has not been an overweight position for them. It's just been relatively neutral to the benchmark. City of London has seen some more attractive discounts of late in the closed-end fund universe. So they've been kind of excited by the opportunity set, as you know, in this market volatility, you get these flows that create opportunities for closed-end fund managers like City of London. So they have mentioned that to us, that the opportunity set that they see for the next couple of months is more attractive than it has been in the recent past. So
Kim, specifically then, is it that GQG and City of London, their Russia exposure? Because I know GQG was way overweight in Russia. I mean, a 10% compared to 7%, that's a pretty big drag. Was it Russia?
Are you looking at GQG?
No, I'm just looking at the emerging markets returns. You know, right?
Yeah, so calendar year to date, the biggest loser, as it were, was City of London. They were down 13.5%. The Russia overweight was definitely part of the decline there. But City of London was kind of the biggest detractor. GQG actually held up reasonably well. They were down just under 8% for the quarter, and the index was down 7%. So not super different there. And then Overlook was just ahead of benchmark for their exposure in China. They were down 8.3% versus the benchmark, which was down 9%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and looking back just over like the trailing 3-year period, and you can go back further to 5 and 10 as well, but going back just to 3 years even, Flynn's emerging markets portfolio has done really well. It's actually outperformed the benchmark by 300 basis points annualized over the trailing 3 years. And that's inclusive of this most recent quarter, which obviously brought that number down.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Overlook and GQG both outperformed by 500 basis points or more annualized over the trailing 3 years. And City of London outperformed by 90 basis points annualized. So, you know, it's a bad quarter for sure, but this part of the portfolio has been extremely additive to Flynn's portfolio over even just the trailing 3-year period. Obviously it's been a painful quarter though, and there haven't been a lot of you know, bright spots in EM given the geopolitical issues and then
I know.
and then the COVID issues in China.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Michael, would you like to talk a bit about the hedge fund performance?
Sure. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. And first, apologize for dialing in about an hour early. I'd like to say that's my first time I've screwed up the time difference, but it's not. So sorry about that. Yeah, if you look on this page, you can see hedge funds are underperforming for the quarter. Take a step back. If you recall, there are sort of two components to that allocation. One that we call diversifiers, and Kim kind of mentioned that earlier. In the diversifier hedge funds that we have exposure to are very low beta, low correlation. The goal of these funds are to try to get a different return stream coming in and also act like a buffer in equity market declines. And then the second part or component to the allocation are growth funds, higher beta, a lot more exposure to the equity markets, and that's primarily where our long-short equity managers are. Our diversifiers in aggregate, that'd be names like Hudson Bay and DK and so forth, over this time period, they were flat. You know, when the market's down 5%, fixed income down almost 6%. So that part of the portfolio did exactly what we wanted to do. Unfortunately, we had one manager on the growth side, and that's Tyborn, that massively underperformed. And that's one manager really caused us to underperform the benchmark entirely. Tyborn, Kim mentioned, we are receiving proceeds. So Tyborn, if you recall, it's a manager that invests in global equities. However, about 60% of their exposure was in China, and a lot of that in tech. So it was a combination of China and tech that really caused them to stumble. In December of last year, 2022, I should say, or 2021, they decided to close the long short equity fund that we're invested in, and they just wanted to focus on their long only fund and a private equity fund. So they decided to close the fund and send capital back to us. So we should have received that. I know Stacy can correct me if I'm wrong, but sometime in April. But it was really that one fund that caused us to underperform. And I should say this, Rose, you're talking about, well, what should we do? Fixed income in a rising rate environment really can't protect us. And I think it's going to be the diversifier side will help us out. If we look in April, when the market was down, S&P down 8.7, ACWI down 8, bonds down 4, our diversifier allocation, or our hedge fund allocation, I should say, our total hedge fund allocation was down about 20 to 30 basis points. So it held up quite nicely and did what we wanted to do. So unfortunately, that underperformance you see there is primarily due to just one manager in our portfolio that is now out.
Okay. Yeah, no, Michael, thank you for breaking that out between the diversifiers and the growth, because I think that's super important. Right? The
Thanks, Stacey.
diversifiers did what they were supposed to.
Exactly. And if you recall, we had tilted that allocation towards diversifiers to try to get some extra downside protection. And with Tyborn out, quite frankly, there's much less market sensitivity in that allocation. So it should hopefully provide or act as more of a buffer going forward.
Okay.
So I'll turn to the following page where we have an update through April. Our current update through April 30th, which is slightly more up to date than this sheet, is that the portfolio is down 4% in April. So that would bring the calendar year to date to say minus 8.2% approximately. To Michael's point about ACWI being down, the All Country World Global Equity Index is down almost 13%, and bonds are down about half of that. So, we're not surprised to end up kind of somewhere in between bonds and equities, but actually, closer to bonds. So that's good. And that's kind of owing in part to the diversifiers allocation and owing in part to the real assets allocation as well. And, I think speaks to the importance of diversification wherever we can get it. So that continues to kind of be something that is attractive from an asset allocation standpoint, picking our asset classes and our regions to make sure that we're getting whatever free risk reduction we can get, and continuing to ensure that the diversifiers and hedge fund portfolio is built out, and especially important in this environment right now. On the following page, we have the peer performance comparison, which I'll just briefly touch on. It's a bit stale, but we don't have enough numbers for March to give you this for March yet. So you can see Flynn's performance in the black circle there, and the median is in the kind of yellow diamond. So relative to all foundations, Flynn in the trailing 1 year is slightly behind the median, and then ahead of the median in all the longer term periods. And it's kind of the same story for all foundations, but more significant outperformance by Flynn relative to the AUM based peers over the long run. And most of these will not have private investments in them. So again, we're still awaiting Q4 private investments, which we anticipate will be a boost to Flynn's Q4 performance.
So how much is still missing? And then I just look at this and I'm like, well, okay, but
private.
Well, I don't know how much is still missing, but
so on average, we're seeing like around 75% of private managers having given us performance data. Some of the fund of funds, like Asia Alts, for example, it takes longer to get there their numbers for the fourth quarter. Usually the fourth quarter is the slowest, so I know it feels like it's been a while, and it has, but we typically can publish a private investments report at the end of May or early June with Q4 numbers, because they do like annual audits, and Q4 just tends to take longer to get.
Right, but you've got the Q3 in here as sort of a placeholder, so it's not a zero.
It's
right?
fully in there up until 9:30, yes, and then it's just the fourth quarter where it's effectively a zero.
What do you expect on the privates, given the correction we've had? Do you think that's going to move the needle much on privates, or we haven't corrected enough to have the privates readjust their books?
I can jump in here. So I think what we're seeing thus far for the fourth quarter, so we're 2 quarters behind. For the fourth quarter, we've been seeing, it really depends on where you are, but we've been seeing numbers be about 5 percentage points in the fourth quarter. First quarter, clearly we haven't started to see anything, and it's still yet unknown as to where managers are going to mark those books. If you recall, second quarter, or I guess first quarter 2020, we didn't see managers mark books, those numbers down as much in the private markets. And that following quarter, we also didn't see them mark them back up. So they didn't have quite as much volatility in the marks. It will be really interesting to see where they are. And I just don't know yet in the first quarter where they're going to be. There will be some managers, because some of those venture managers that Jim was noting have more publics in their portfolio than they have historically. That's not generally what you have in your portfolio. That's not where we have most of our investments. We don't have things like a Tiger in our portfolio where there's a lot of public exposure. But even within the legacy portfolio, Sequoia had a phenomenal year last year. Again, I don't think that and that's in the legacy portfolio, I don't think they marked their marks up as much last year. So to the extent they have to cut them a little bit in the first, I don't think they'll have to cut them as much, but that is going to be, I think, the part that I'll be watching a lot. And sorry, I don't have more of a definitive answer for the first quarter yet. We just don't know. Managers haven't even given us an indication yet of where they're going to come in.
So just being me, 68th percentile for 1 year and 41st for 3 years is lower than where we've been before. What are other foundations doing that we're not, or what should we, why are others doing better than we are?
So I would say over the 3, 5, and 10 year, other foundations are not doing better than you are. You are, in the top 2 quartiles over the 3, the 5, and the 10 year periods. It's really over this last year that you're not, and it's a mix. And when you look at the last year, you had people like the top performing endowments, and we'll go through the peer performance for the next one. The top performing endowments last year were those that had a lot of venture. Last year was really all about venture. And while we have it, we don't have it at the very large levels. Venture and growth, that was really, kind of the name of the game for in terms of private growth for 2021. And we haven't, piled into that. We have decent amount of exposures, but to Jim's point of, if you're one of those institutions now that has 50% of your portfolio over here, you now have to trim, or you need to be looking at trimming. That's not who Flinn is. So in that period, of 2021, we wouldn't have kept up. I do think, over the longer term, we've shown a very balanced portfolio. And again, have outperformed all of those peers on a 3, 5, and 10 year basis, particularly when you look at your size range. So, and those tend to include peers who are similarly invested as you. When you look over to the right, so foundations between 150 and 350, you're in the top third over the 3 year, almost top quartile over the 5-year and nearing top decile over a 10-year.
Well, I guess I'd ask that when we take a deeper dive into this in the fall, when all the reporting should be in and some of the third-party results, you know, I do want to kind of pull it apart. I know that our former real estate manager was a big drag for a few years. It's probably affecting some of this. So maybe a pro forma without that one. But I guess we'll see where it shakes out in the fall a little bit more. Because I see what you're saying, Natalie, but your universe size is 20.
Right.
So, you know, it's easy to be on the top or bottom of that with probably not a lot.
That's true.
That's understandable. So we'll take a look. We'll take a look in the fall. I think we'll come out pretty good relative to a broader group as well. And, you know, we don't necessarily pick ours just because we pick ours because that's the most readily available information. It tends to have a big group of the available institutions, but, you know, we'll certainly do the deeper dive in the fall and look at the other information that comes out annually. As you know, the NACUBO information will be a year old. So it won't be through December of last year. It just came out and it is through June of last year because of the way that they report. And so that's why we can't report those types of things on an annual basis. The Council of Foundations will come out in a couple of months. So we haven't even gotten theirs yet for the last year. But yeah, we will absolutely do the deeper dive for the next meeting.
Great. All right.
Natalie, when you commented the other foundations have done so well on privates, is that a realized return or unrealized return largely that is driven with that performance?
Most of it is going to be unrealized. I mean, we've seen some good we saw some pretty good realizations last year, but the vast majority of that performance is unrealized. Sean.
Thank you.
Okay, going.
So we always take a moment to do a manager fee review once a year, and I'll keep it quick. I think the takeaways for me are that fees are in line with what we expect to see. The average fees haven't changed much relative to the last couple of times that we've looked at this. Anywhere between like 95 to 110, 115 basis points feels average. The total assets average management fee for Flinn is 1.02%. You'll see that a couple of the managers have incentive fees in public equities, but it's most common, of course, in the hedge fund world and private investments. We, of course, would always rather pay incentive fees relative to management fees, because it is really good for aligning incentives, and you only pay if things are going well. So I look at those kind of 20% numbers as, well, at least we're on the same side of things, where like the manager wins and Flynn wins at the same time when we have those management fees or those incentive fees. And then, you know, looking at the public asset classes, fees are in line. You know, fees in general we've been trying to negotiate them more and more, and some fees have come down. So we continue to kind of push on that when and where we can. But there's nothing that stands out glaringly on this review for me. Are there any questions on the fees?
Did you have anything? No, I didn't. Nothing was surprising.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. Well, we can move on to the current allocation and some recommended cash flows.
You know, not to All right, I'm giving my opinion here. My buddies here can disagree with me. And in fact, Stacy and I had a conversation about this yesterday. I get it, what you're saying about adage is above the, we should rebalance in the US. Personally, and I know the first quarter, the US did as badly as others. I am more comfortable in the US right now. And my view of adage is, so adage is what we, knows an enhanced index. And if you look at their performance, so it's a little bit above the S&P. And if this were an S&P 500 index fund and it was 20% weighting, nobody would complain or have a, so frankly, I do not want a chip adage. And I get what you're all saying about emerging markets and all of that, but I am thinking short term. I don't usually think short term, but personally, I think there's some world issues that are going to affect, and the strength of the dollar, we didn't talk to Jim about, there are issues in the world that are going to affect other countries more than the US. And so frankly, whatever cash Stacy needs, I wouldn't take it out of US. That's my view.
I would second that motion.
Cameron, you're not overwhelmed by me. You're in.
Yeah, no. I think a recession in Europe is a done deal, frankly. What I would say is that I think in the international markets, we're moving towards a setup where it's going to be very attractive, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think in the very near term, I agree with your assessment. I don't know, that may change over the next 3 months, depending on what happens with further pricing adjustments. I'm also less optimistic that the Federal Reserve will be able to thread the needle here for us. I think there's a very significant chance that we can be tipped into recession. Some factoids I came across recently along the lines that the most inflation has ever come down without triggering a recession is 2.5%. Ever.
Interesting.
And all it takes to, in terms of changes to the employment rate, historically, where the numbers line up, it's only 0.3% before you tip into a recession. Not every recession is the same or as deep, and certainly we've had some price adjustments here that are meaningful, but I just think the risks are high, and a lot of my peers that I've been talking to, there is a spectrum. There's a fairly wide spectrum of how people are reacting, but conviction isn't really high anywhere, but nor is optimism high anywhere. So on this decision, I don't have any reason to strongly disagree. I do think internationally is going to be challenged. I think at some point, emerging markets are going to look very, very good, but not every emerging market. I think it's also going to be a time to be selective in that space, even when it turns. So
yeah, I agree. Stacy, how much cash do we need?
To make it through October, which is because our next meeting's in August, and if we take any action, there's a little bit of lag. I think I came up with about 3 million with some assumptions around capital calls, because for example, when Accolade makes the call, it's usually $250,000 to $500,000. So I need some cushion, and IRNM is always my backstop.
Yeah.
So if we want to do like 2.5 today or 3 or even 4, then I'll be fine because I'm managing that. But I don't foresee a liquidity issue.
Yeah, but we should, so Natalie, you're hearing it from us that to please find $3 million somewhere else.
Yes.
Please.
And I completely anticipated pushback here. I feel like it's always my job to at least give you the opinion. And the view here is definitely, or I guess the rationale here is not by any means taking money away from the US. In fact, my thought here is actually when you do net and you think about the fact that 65% of our global equity exposure is actually US. We technically, if we were to keep things the same, should be taking 65% of our cash needs from US exposure. We've been taking much less, and here we'd be recommending taking much less. So it is, I do not want you to believe that the idea is to shift money away from the US. In fact, well, it may feel that way just because of the relative size of adage, so it's not the case here. But I do understand. I also will note here that the adage money, even though I know we'll take a look somewhere else, wouldn't come in until, this wouldn't even fund the 3Q. So it doesn't fund the needs through October. Because we have to put it in so early, it would look at funding needs for the fourth quarter of this year. So just, again, I feel like my job is always to be looking out, particularly in a period where we have continued volatility, to be thinking about where are we getting needs so that we're not ever in that type of crunch during periods of high volatility. That this is just not the time that I actually want extra cash to be able to rebalance in. Should we continue to see, further market deteriorations? I don't ever want to be tight cash during these types of periods personally. And so, yeah, the adage money actually, even if we did it, wouldn't come out until fourth quarter. It's a pretty tight recommendation to get us through just October right now. We took money from emerging markets last quarter. And so the thought here was to take money from developed and some US this quarter. But if we wanted to, and then a little piece, and I don't want to take too much from real assets, but a little trim to real assets, we could certainly double the amount that we are taking from the developed ex-US. If we wanted to do that. The only other thing that I would note, and we just may want to think about this in terms of exposures, Tyrus, if you would go, I think 2 pages past this to the sector exposures. There. Is if you think about, a rising rate or inflationary type of environment, we talked a little bit about this, the things that tend to do well and have done well, relatively better, are your cyclicals. And so if we look at the financials in the middle of the page in the light turquoise green, the majority of that type of exposure right now is coming from our ex-US exposure. Energy to the left in the purple, materials third from the right in the lighter green, similarly, and utilities. So we may just want to think down the line if we, continue to want to target these managers in these areas, do we want to think about adding that type of exposure elsewhere? So that we then aren't unintentionally taking money away from some of these areas that are continuing, that are poised to do well in this type of continued inflationary rising rate environment.
Well, Natalie, so I know Jackson Square has been a little volatile over the long run in the portfolio. Like it's really up or it's really down. So I know that they're developed North America, but is that strategy, is it just like the cycle to it right now, or
it's the cycle to it? They're aggressive growth. And so, remember we took some money from them last year after they had done extremely well. After, we saw kind of tech and healthcare do very well. And if you look at their exposures, 28% in technology, information technology in that peach, kind of fourth from the right, almost 20% in healthcare right there in the middle. In the yellow, they're also going to have your heaviest exposures to communication services. all the way to the left, which has been the worst performing asset class for the year, even worse than IT.
Okay. Yeah, just because again, they seem like a pretty like tactical player in the portfolio that we can, you know, kind of add and subtract to. So, and with ease. So,
and I would agree with you. If we were continue, like, I think, you know, once we see some horizon on the rate environment, because the rates are going to hit growth, you know, more acutely than they're going to hit generally the value sectors and the cyclical sectors. We continue to see more hemorrhaging there. Like that would be a group that I would look to add to. So having some money from other places where we want to rebalance in, should we continue to see, you know, this type of continued environment is, you know, in the back of my mind on the horizon.
So, and our value manager continues to have a bunch of tech.
Yeah.
So if we chose not to do adage right now, what would you do?
So then our option would be, I think, to just increase our amount from Silchester and MFS. I think we took money from the EM managers last time, and short of completely blowing out City of London, you know, there's not a lot. I mean, they're just so much smaller. We just don't have a lot of room there. We can't fund spending from those sides. I mean, they're just too small to fund our annual spending needs. So it has to come from the larger allocations. So we would have to, I think, you know, increase the amount that we take from Global X. We could also, you know, take more from Principal, but I wouldn't do that right now. Again, just looking at where we're getting any of that type of cyclical exposure, given that we would be underweight if we're taking more and more from the developed international, I'd want to keep some of that cyclical exposure within the Principal exposure.
How much of our fixed income portfolio is comprised of foreign bonds?
None.
Oh, that's good.
Dodge and Cox is domestic. We checked with them after the issues in Russia just to confirm you're not investing there. That's not what they do. IRNM, you know, shorter duration.
Very short, yeah. And Vanguard,
then,
got it.
Yeah. We took out we killed our global bond allocation as we saw yields go negative in the global bond area, and we killed that global bond allocation a couple of years ago.
Well, then let's do what you said, a double Silchester and MFS. MFS has been good, but let's just do that, right? What do you think?
I think that works. I mean, I'm not opposed to taking a little bit out of adage. I know that like they're in the US, but they're still bad.
So the problem I see right now is that if you're investing in anything but the United States, how do you make a good decision right now?
It's hard.
I think it's very hard.
That's why we talked about it yesterday. We're like, because there's a conference,
even if we go into recession, that's better off than all these uncertainties that I see. Like, who's going to be your trading partner? Who's going to be this? Where are you going to manufacture?
Right.
The corporate boardrooms have been turned upside down, I think, in the first 3 months of this year. So sticking with good companies that are based in the United States, making good decision-making seems to be one of the safest bets.
Yeah, and I don't mean to disagree with Jim. I mean, I guess I often disagree with Jim, but we don't know what's going on here in Arizona. We have all these semiconductor, whatever they call fabs that are just being built like crazy. And I mean, and we all know we have a problem with, semiconductors, and Sean is, boots on the ground in healthcare, and you heard his opinion. What if there is a change in how U.S. companies allocate their capital expenditures and they're back to the US. So
I don't think it's what if, I think it's happening right now.
mhm.
Nobody's making a tent. Why would you put, I mean, I was just on calls this week. It's like, why would we manufacture anything in China when you could do it in the United States? The cost is way too high. It's the uncertainty. So
I do think that China is shifting from a manufacturing oriented economy to more of a service driven economy, or domestically a consumer driven economy, which we do see as economies become more developed. And we have been seeing that, for a number of years. It does shift the type of opportunities that become, I think, interesting. And it's certainly, we've seen it, we'll continue to see volatility there. I do think there continues to be particularly domestically driven opportunities there. And I think there's also the risk of, now we can argue, and I certainly don't know what the effectiveness will be of, their monetary policy, but the diverging monetary policies that we have between the US and the China today. Like, if we continue to need to drastically tighten and they are doing the opposite, we certainly know the impact that, those types of policies can have on markets in the near term. I don't know what's going to happen. And so I tend to, and I know we're not talking about cutting anything out one way or the other here, but I tend to then just, try to be prepared for a variety of scenarios in the portfolio.
Oh, yeah. And just FYI, we had lunch with Melissa Ma when she was in town. And she was great. And it was interesting. For the first time, there's no population growth in China. And I said to Melissa, well, that's good news, because in the past, they've had to grow their economy in order to keep people employed. And she said they are very concerned about the lack of population growth in China. And they're kind of trying to throw money at the problem. So anyway, beside the point. So
we can double the global ex-US. I mean, I totally hear the points. It's just batting around a few different ideas. Because to your point, Sean, there's not a whole lot of good answers, right? You're trying to protect the portfolio. There's also disciplined approach, and we're going to need cash. And, a lot of our grant making is in the fourth quarter. So, some of that's, I've mapped it out and we'll be fine, but we're going to have to talk about it again in the fall.
Of course.
So.
Of course.
we got to get cash.
Steve, you look pensive.
I was just wondering, I hadn't heard really anybody talk specifically about energy sourcing. And so as I start to think about
that's a big deal.
sort of the reallocation of energy sources, whether we're going to do more domestic conventional stuff, whether everybody's now going to try to become more self-reliant and cut off a lot of the international trade on energy. What's that going to do to the marketplace?
Yeah.
It just adds another element of uncertainty.
And also just, I mean, I can see where we would trim international before it potentially could get worse.
So that's what we want to do. Was that clear, Natalie?
So I think we're gonna double the amount that we're taking from Silchester and MFS.
Yeah.
And we will come back to this conversation again in the October meeting.
Always.
Yep.
Always.
And we're comfortable with the 1 million, the slight trim on principal.
Yeah, that was at the bottom.
If that's what you think, why are you recommending that?
It's more, and we have to, we got to fund spending. We did take from emerging markets over the last couple of months. Again, they've done really well. I don't want to take more, but they're one of the few places that have done well.
So it's more of a trim. Because they have done well, right? So.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Vote.
Oh, vote. Sorry. It's like,
I have meeting minutes that the auditors will want.
Okay.
So to make sure we're.
I mean, I have a motion to approve doubling the trim of Silchester MFS and principal DRA. May I have a motion?
So moved. So a total of 6 million, is that what? Is that-
7.
So
Out of
three.
Silchester and MFS?
Yes, and then
3 from those, 3 from each of those, and then 1 from,
1 million
Principal,
from principal.
And then 1
to
from
five.
principal.
Yeah. That's, and a second, please. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
All right. So where are we at, please? Hedge fund recommendation. Yeah, I have some real questions about this one, Michael.
We piled it on today. We did not do ourselves any favors. We know.
Okay, well, it's funny, Rose, when I heard you asking Jim about Europe, I thought, oh, you may have some questions about this one. If you don't mind, Tyrus, can you turn to page 38 in the materials? And by the way, Cameron, you were talking about recession, changes of recession earlier for, another bullet point to add. I think Jamie Dinan came out, it's either yesterday or 2 days ago, and his thoughts were a third chance soft landing, third chance hard landing, third chance, they thread the needle. So not really sure at the moment, but certainly the risks are there. So I do have a recommendation. In the past, we've actually had managers call in, and I think we've had a mixed results with that. We've had some good presentations, but also some presentations where maybe we've rolled our eyes a little bit. So I thought I'd give it a shot today and describe the manager, provide an overview, answer your questions, and if there are questions I can't answer, certainly come back to the committee. So starting on page 38, it is a recommendation of $3 million into Zebedee. It's called the Zebedee Focus Fund. Before I get into what it is, let me give you a little bit of a background on Zebedee. This strategy that we're recommending today, it's basically been up and running since 2001. Julian Edwards is the portfolio manager. He, along with 2 other portfolio managers, founded Zebedee in 2001. And the goal was to run a product that had very low net exposure focused on Western European companies. So by the way, low net exposure means your longs minus your shorts. You have very little sort of directional exposure to the equity markets. The 3 PMs, including Julian, ran very separate books. Julian ran basically what's called a best ideas book, or maybe a very concentrated book. And over time, he outperformed the other 2 portfolio managers, and investors said, we don't want the other 2 portfolio managers. We just want to invest with Julian. So they decided to close the fund, and Julian relaunched Zebedee. He relaunched the Zebedee Focus Fund in 2008. Basically, again, the same strategy that he's been running since 2001. Launched in 2008, and it's been closed to investors until 2019. It recently reopened. He also has one other fund I'll just mention quickly. In 2017, he launched what's called the Core Fund. And that was at the request of a couple of the Focus Fund investors. The investor said, we would like something that has a little bit more return potential. Maybe you can take a little bit more risk. So he launched the Core Fund, which is just simply a 2 times levered version of the Focus Fund. We're not recommending the Core Fund today. We're recommending the Focus Fund. And I'll talk to you about exposures in a minute. The firm has 1.25 billion in assets. So it's a great size for what they do. They've been very thoughtful on keeping assets low. Liquidity is paramount to this strategy, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. They have mentioned to us that around 1.5 or 1.75, they'll probably close the fund again because they want to make sure that it's very liquid internally. So we're keeping our eye on that. In terms of employees, it's 11 employees, 4 investment professionals. And it's Julian and 3 analysts, and it's located in London. That's a little bit of a background on Zebedee. So what do they do? What does Zebedee Focus do? The fund is a long short equity fund, and it's focused on specific sectors: materials, autos, financials, airlines, metals, and mining. Their investable universe is very, and this is what Julian's been focused on again since 2001. The investable universe, or the companies that they will consider investable, that they will look at, is very small. It's about 50 companies. It's 50 of the most liquid European companies within those sectors. The way that the process works The analysts, the three analysts that are somewhat sector specialists, and including Julian, will perform bottom-up research on companies. The analysts will present their ideas to Julian. So that part of the research process, quite frankly, is no different than what our other long-short equity managers, Park Presidio, Nitorum, or quite frankly, our long-only managers are doing. It's just bottom-up, solid fundamental research. What makes Zebedee different than what we already have in the portfolio, what we have in the long-only portfolio, is that Julian will combine all that bottom-up fundamental analysis that they're doing on those handful of companies. He'll go combine that with sentiment factors, technical factors, and his own sort of macroeconomic outlook to help with deciding, okay, when do I want to enter a position? How do I size it? And how do I exit it? So they're using this additional data, again, sentiment, technicals, macroeconomic outlook, to try to ensure that they're not going up against any sort of market or macroeconomic headwinds. So the way to think about Zebedee is that they're investing for the long term. The names don't change a lot, but they're risk managing in a very, very short time frame. So in a market environment like this, where it's very volatile, you'll see a lot of trading happening within the portfolio, in and out of companies, and you'll see the exposures move around quite a bit. Again, same way he's been managing it since the beginning. So what you end up with is his best ideas portfolio. The number of stocks, it's very concentrated, from 5 to 20. That's very concentrated. In addition to the number of stocks, he will use sector baskets or indices to express either a standalone trade or to help hedge the portfolio or to go short. Because he will use those sort of technical sentiment, macroeconomic data to help with positioning, as I said, you're going to see gross and net move around quite a bit. So the gross is longs plus your shorts. Gross exposure for focus has ranged from 28%, that's 28% longs plus short, to 97. It's averaged 53%. It's averaged 82%, I should say, over time. So that means the fund at times will hold a substantial amount of cash. If Julian is nervous about the environment, he will back off and raise cash. If he has 100% conviction in a company from a fundamental bottom-up point of view, but either his macroeconomic outlook is not sort of hitting on all cylinders, sentiment factors not hitting on all cylinders, or sort of technicals, he will back away. The net exposure of the portfolio, that's your longs minus your short. So, what's the directionality look like? Will be anywhere from net long to net short. Now, we don't have any long short equity managers that will be net short. They will be net short, and they have been before. It's actually ranged, I think, -9 to about 38% long. So the average net long position is about 15%. So it's not very directional. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about performance, most of our long short equity managers fall within that kind of growth category. Zebedee is a long short equity manager, but definitely falls within that diversifier category, because as we'll see here shortly, when we look at the statistics, very low beta, again, very low gross and net exposures. And I think, Cameron, I think it was you. Everybody looks like a little ant. I'm not sure who said this. Yeah. But there was a comment about, I think Europe's going into recession, right? Why would we be there? If you ask Julian, he's going to say the same thing. I think Europe's going into recession. And he has been rotating his portfolio to be net short, so he can take advantage of that. If you look right now at the exposure, it's about 35% gross. So he's sitting on a lot of cash, and 0% net. And he's slowly going to be net short. The goal of the portfolio, there are two goals. One is to generate an average annual compound return of about 10%. And there's also a big focus on minimizing the drawdown. Again, that's kind of why it fits in that diversifier category. He does not want to have any month that has more than a 3% drawdown. That's the goal. Now, it can happen. Last time that he had a month that was that had returned less than 3 or worse than 3%, however you want to say it, was all the way back in May of 2012. So he's done a very good job, managing the portfolio and trying to avoid these drawdowns. In fact, if you look in 1Q of 2020, right, when the market was down 21, this fund was up about 2%. And so far this year, at least through the first quarter, market's down 5, Europe's down about 9, Julian's up 4%. And in April, I think he's up another, say, call it 50 basis points. We had a conversation with Julian last week, asked about his outlook, and he said, in this type of outlook, sort of the tortoise wins the race. If he can sit on cash, if he's nervous, and eke out sort of a 1% return per month, then he's done his job about hitting that 10% sort of bogey and being very conservative about it. And again, he's getting close to it. He's up over 4% this year. The terms you can see, excuse me, on the left-hand side of that page, page 38. If you go to the left-hand side, it's a 1.5% management fee. So that's average for on the hedge fund side, and a 20% incentive fee. Again, that's average. Entry is monthly. For Flinn, they know we're looking at it, so we have capacity. If for whatever reason we decided, or you asked me a question that I cannot answer, and we need to push off the decision, we could do that. And you can see the exit. It is quite liquid. There is a 1-year lock. But let's say we go in and within that 1 year, we're like, no, we want to get out. Within the first 6 months, there's a 2% penalty. Within the next 6 months, there's a 1% penalty. But anytime you go into a manager, I would never expect to go out within the first year. After that first year lock, it's monthly liquidity. So quite liquid. Let's see. I'm going to pause right there to see if there's any questions, or I can keep going through our highlights, considerations, and then we can look at the performance.
Michael, why is the fund called Zebedee?
Well, that's a great question. So I originally thought, I mean, if you've read the Bible before, Zebedee is a fisherman in the Old Testament on the Sea of Galilee. And I thought it was, and I asked, I was like, is this about the fisherman on the sea? And he was like, no, this is, when he launched it, there are a lot of funds being launched. And if you look at hedge funds, a lot of these people have very huge, gigantic egos, and they name the funds after themselves. So they'll put, Apollo or Greek gods in the name. It's a very tough business. And he wanted to be a little bit humble about it. So Zebedee is actually, I think, a cartoon character from the 1990s in London. So that's what it is. I thought it was going to be the fisherman, but it's a cartoon character, actually.
Yeah, the reason I ask is it sounds like a silly question, but oftentimes there's some symbolism associated with that name, which can reveal something about the characters and the mission.
Yeah, well, Julian is a pretty humble guy. And what I just described to you, I mean, so the bottom-up fundamental analysis, look, a lot of managers do that. I don't think that's what really separates them, but it's sort of him incorporating technical aspects, sentiment aspects in his macroeconomic outlook. That's very difficult to do. And he knows that. So he does take a pretty humble approach towards this. And I think that had to do with a little bit towards having that, that name and that character, or the reason he chose that particular name. The P&L, his P&L is basically his North Star. So if he's entering a month at a loss, then he's going to be very hesitant to be adding risk to the portfolio. If he enters a month positive, so you're up, he'll be more willing to add risk to the portfolio because he have a little bit more cushion. So pretty conservative guy.
Michael?
Yes.
So I'm happy he's 0% net. I mean, that just sort of informs us too, that if Julian's cautious about Europe, I am too. I'm also, so he has started this fund in a period where there's been zero inflation. And now we have inflation. We have higher interest rates. We have higher labor rates. We have higher, and he's investing in industries where none of which can set their own price. They're all price takers, not price setters. Autos, we're over autoed in this world. Airlines, they have labor, energy, and debt coverage, all of which are, and it's maybe he's short all these.
Yep.
Metals and mining, again. So I don't appreciate the fundamentals. Unless he's shorting all these, and he knows these aren't my kind of industries. So I am a little concerned about, what he invests in, frankly.
Yep, that's a great point. So there is a reason that he follows and only invests in these particular sectors. Is that, to your point, Rose, and you nailed it. These are all pretty much highly levered companies in those sectors. And they're very susceptible to over or under market reaction to exactly the things that you just said in terms of price movement. And he's been following them for so long, he thinks he has an edge in it. You're absolutely right. Airline, he's net short. Banks, believe it or not, he's going to go net short. He's not net short yet because he feels like there's still a tailwind from rising rates that are, beneficial to banks. But at some point, you're going to see, because economy is going to go into recession or slow down dramatically, you're going to start to see write-downs, and therefore that will impact the earnings of banks, and you'll see banks just come down. So you nailed it in terms of the outlook for those particular securities or companies. Yes, probably not the best. So what does Julian do? He goes short. So even though the outlook isn't the best, perhaps in terms of growth prospects, he can still earn a return by going short on those companies.
Is he making relative value trades within these sectors too, or is he just
No, it's primarily directional, so no relative value trades. That being said, he will, and he's done this. Let's say he wants to go net short on banks, and that's what's happening now. He is short Deutsche Bank, but he's not entirely convinced that the tailwind is over. So he'll have a basket of banks on the long side to try to protect them a little bit, try to protect that short. When he feels like that tailwind is over, he'll take that basket off and then just be sort of net short the whatever bank it may be. But right now it's Deutsche Bank. But it's not a relative value trade, or a pairs trade, I should say.
As interest rates rise, the cost of shorting is going up.
Well, it's interesting. That's right. Well, what you also get out of it with interest rates going up, your short rebate should be going up as well. And in the 2000s, I think the short rebate probably accounted for 1.5% to 2% of a long short equity manager's return. So basically, a short rebate is, let's say I'm going to go short a company. I go to my prime broker and say, I want to short Ford. They go out, borrow the stock, sell it. Those proceeds go into an account. The interest earned on that account is called a short rebate. In the 2000s, probably starting like 2010, 2011 through maybe 18, 19, it actually, because the interest rates were zero or close to it, it actually cost managers in many cases to short a stock. So when they short a stock, they're in the whole day one, right, when they short. So it should be a little bit more beneficial, I think, on the short side with rates going up, at least from a short rebate point of view.
Michael,
Yes.
The largest investor is 1/3 of assets. So is there some sort of agreement that they won't sell for several years or what?
There's not, and that's and great pickup on that, Rose. I think you're on the second page. Thanks, Tyrus. That is a sort of an old data. It's actually the largest is now down to 21%. And so I think I mentioned it's still a lot. Look, it's still concentrated. From 2008, when Julian started this, until about 18, I guess, or 19, he did not have an IR person. I mean, he wasn't really focused on building it. And then he realized, I have a concentration issue. And hired an IR person. And so the customer base or the investor base is starting to diversify a little bit. But it is a very liquid portfolio. If someone were to redeem, he should be able to redeem quite easily and not have an impact, because again, they're looking at the 50 of the largest, most liquid companies in Europe. But something we'll keep an eye on, and Rose, to your point too, which probably what you're getting at as well, we're always looking at the break-even cost of a fund, right? If a number of clients redeem, what's the lowest AUM a manager can live on? And it's Julian and 3 analysts and a few other and 7 other people. It's a pretty low bogey.
Well, it's good because it's really all Julian too.
Well, there's key man. How old is he?
Julian is at upper 50s to low 60s. And I should also point out, Rose, that question about concentration, and actually, Stacy, you said that about Julian. It's just Julian. That's right. That's one of the considerations whenever we're looking at a manager like this is key man risk. Well, what happens, the proverbial bus, what happens to us as LPs? And that's something we always take a look at in the documents. There is a key man clause. If something were to happen to Julian, then we'll be able to get out. Very quickly unless there are other questions.
No, and we have other agenda
Oh, okay,
items.
okay.
I don't know what we should do here. Are there further questions about Zebedee?
He was the father of the apostle Mark and John.
That's right.
And I knew
That's
you would
right.
know that.
That's right.
Further questions?
So the firm assets at 1.27 billion, is this the only strategy at the firm?
This is it. Yeah, this is it. I mean, he has the core fund, which is the exact same strategy. It's just mechanically levered 2 times of this, but this is the only thing he focuses on. This is the only strategy. So he's 100% of his time is spent on Zebedee, on the focus fund. Very quickly, while I have you, page 40, Tyrus, if you don't mind. Thank you. You can see the return on the left. He's close to his 10% return with a very low beta. Look at that to the right, 0.23. Okay. Our other long-short equity managers betas are higher. This definitely falls into that diversifier category. And then I'll just point you to the right-hand side. This is asking the question, okay, when the market's up, when Europe is up, because these are primarily European companies, on average, how much has Europe been up? And on average, when Europe is up, it's been up 4.3%. Well, how much of that did Zebedee capture? So basically, this is telling us that when Europe is up, Zebedee's capturing maybe 35% of that up market of the up. And if you look below, it's saying the same thing. Okay, when Europe is down, how much on average? Again, it's average, and that'll vary. But on average, how much of that downside is he capturing? And you can see below, he's basically flat. He's capturing 35% of the upside and 2% of the downside. That's a great skew. So he's done a very good job on again, managing on the downside. And he's not trying to hit, again, home runs. It is a steady, trying to hopefully get a 10% return. It doesn't happen all the time, of course. But his goal is a 10% return and no more than a 3% monthly drawdown.
Yeah, it said in there his number one goal is preservation.
Yep. Yep. And again, it's something, I think it's diversifying to what we own. It's a completely different, we already have long-short equity, but this is a sort of a different way to approach it.
Are all the investors dollar denominated?
Are all the LPs dollar?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'll have to come back to you because I think there are a few European investors.
But it is a dollar fund.
Oh, it's a dollar fund. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. It is a dollar fund.
You guys want to do?
I don't know what we want to do. What does the committee want to do?
What else can I tell you?
Yeah, Steve.
I express an opinion, but I don't know how firmly I hold it, which is usual. If this is a place to play and you've got somebody who will play on the upside and the downside on it and has a good return, and we have confidence in, kind of why not?
Sean?
I think that's reasonable.
I think Europe's ripe for long short.
Yeah.
Scott?
I was just looking at something that talk about the ESG and almost all the instruments are non-ESG industries.
Yeah.
So you think that's self-limiting in a way that concerns
I
you?
don't know, I mean, is it double talk? I kind of get.
But if they're shorting the industries, does that make it ESG?
Dave, do you have any opinion? Any?
I don't. This one, I'm feeling a little bit out of my depth. I could go along with making the investment.
Okay. I think Steve, I think, you said it well. You both said it well. And Cameron, if this is a good time to, it does make me, when I first saw it, I'm like, strike three, this guy's out, Europe, utilities, airline. But, if he shorts them and he's net short now, then yeah, that's.
But Scott raised an interesting point. If he's long and shorting, but he's got this ESG restriction on his investments, is that going to curtail his ability to deal with the entirety of the European market? Is he excluding from trading in a significant amount of opportunities? And if he is, why is that good?
But Michael, did you hear this?
I caught a portion of that. It's something about ESG, but that's about all I heard.
Yeah, Michael, my question was if their ESG statement talks about they limit their participation, do not invest in companies whose primary businesses involve weapons, nuclear technology, defense, tobacco, or alcohol. So if they're taking themselves out of a significant part of the European economy, does that limit their ability to fully discharge their mission?
Yeah, great question. I don't think so. Recall they going into this, they only focused on a limited amount of sectors: materials, autos, financials, airlines, metals and mining. So they're not going to be in alcohol or tobacco or defense or technology or sort of weapons. Quite frankly, that seems like a throwaway statement if you ask me a little bit. But
I agree.
So because they're not in those sectors, so I don't think that's going to impede them whatsoever.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve this investment, please?
I think Cameron ought to make it so he could take a stand and live with the results.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Steve's gonna second it though.
I'll second. I'll be right way behind you.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Sorry, did you feel dragged through the coals now, Michael?
I appreciate that. That was good.
Michael was ready. We knew we were not coming with the most popular of things today.
You made us comfortable, and because I came loaded for bear, frankly.
Yeah.
So
You brought a BB gun to that one though.
So you want to do the investment policy? That's important.
That's all filled in. I'll turn it over to Kim to give good things to discuss.
I mean, we have a few minutes. Was there something else you want to do?
No, you want to do the investment policy?
Yeah.
And
yeah, there's not a ton of material changes in there.
Because Steve had a question.
Yeah, I had a comment more than a question on the DEI language that's in there in several different places.
Right.
I want to make sure, are we talking about the application to DEI, how we are going to use DEI when we select managers, or are we saying we're going to look at the internal DEI policies of the people we're thinking of investing in, or are we saying both? Part of my concern was, depending on what you mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion in an investment decision, I'm not quite sure how we would use it. In other words,
well, that's a good point. And we kind of talked about that before on.
I don't mind having a statement of principle in here at all, but we have a DEI policy, and to the extent appropriate and necessary, we'll reflect that in our investment decisions, or something that's broad enough to say we embrace the principle without being overly prescriptive or vague in terms of what it means.
I think my take on it was to be more of an overarching idea, and that in working with Cambridge, that there is an equitable platform for all managers. Now, if that read is a little bit different in the IPS, then that is a good point you bring up, because
I'd like to give us flexibility, but I love saying it. I just want to make sure we have flexibility in figuring out what it means in reality.
I totally agree with you 100%. And that even gets into the SII conversation from last time, like what's really coming first. And it's the fiduciary, the general consensus was it's the fiduciary duty.
Company we want to invest in, but they don't have a DEI policy. Are we going to say no, even though it supports one of our mission fields and they're really good in it?
Right.
Well, I would hope all that would come into account. But I would say that it's probably not the overriding
Yeah.
idea behind it because there's a lot of different thinking.
So
to
my
it.
only comment would be, I'd rather just see one or two sentences which said, take that into consideration.
Okay.
But that's just me.
Well, I mean, we put it in the general information. And so if we take, that's where the mission statement is. And then that's definitely a good place for that because it's not filtered down. The
Right.
only other pieces were in the staff responsibilities and, well, excuse me, the IC responsibilities and the advisor responsibilities. And
But we're not going to require a fund to make sure that all of its individual holdings are scrutinized on a DEI basis, are we? I mean, that seems like an impossible task.
You can't uniformly apply something that's called
Yeah.
DEI.
And I'd hate to create the impression that we're taking a strong stand that this is going to be all. And frankly, I don't even know what inclusion means on some investment decision you make.
well, then maybe we just leave it in the general and take it out of the duties components so that it's part of our general
Yeah.
theme as an
Good idea.
organization in the general section. And then as we move through time and things are changing and
Well, we
we're
can
still
narrow it
talking
down
about
as we get experience on it, or make it more specific.
well, but I think you're right. You don't want to accidentally overly point to it by having it in the duties section. So how about we take it out of the duties for each, which was something that I had sort of brought up, but I see your point now and leave it up in the general.
Sure.
And then I think it's, again, because Flynn has it on this main page and on the, there's a DEI tab now, and as we're trying to be a good steward to all our stakeholders and ourselves, then that might be a good way to do it.
So, may I speak?
Please.
Yeah.
And Heidi, I don't know if is that Heidi up there?
Yeah.
I don't have my glasses on, so I think it is. Part of the DEI subcommittee met, and I think one of the considerations, and I don't think you have to word this specifically, but was that the nice review that Cambridge did, last meeting or the one before, on DEI and the different managers, that we would like that to be an annual presentation. So did I reference that correctly?
Yes, correctly. I thought that was a wonderful way to bring in DE&I into the conversation without being prescriptive to the point made earlier. Is just really how are we being thoughtful with our investments and inclusive with our investments.
Okay. That's great. And we do have it on the work plan for the fall, and it'll be part of our regular fall lineup going forward so that we have a meeting calendar and that's on it every year. So I think that's a good way to approach that. And then when it comes back to the IPS, then again, we can strike it out of the duties themselves and leave it up above in the general comments so that we're in sync between, yes, we want to report out of what's happening as part of the ideals without being overly prescriptive in the duties. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does too.
Okay.
Yeah.
My only comment is that, looking at the general information, I would just simplify it and be as flexible as possible.
Yeah.
We say that we believe is expansive. Well, first of all, when we use words like expansive and vigorous and all this other kind of stuff, that takes on meaning that I'm not sure I'd rather vigorously rise all of Arizona rather than just do diversity, equity. I want to do everything, right? So I would try to keep it as simple as possible in terms of all the wordings that we use.
I'd like to be vigorously thoughtful.
Okay.
Those are.
So do you need a motion or do you want to rewrite it and submit it for a vote next time?
Why don't we we'll strike those pieces and I'll go back to the general, which I'm not that worried about, and then we'll just reapprove it at the next meeting.
Fine.
Does that make sense?
Good.
I think we're almost there. It's just good. It's probably better to approve the final version, even if it takes a couple minutes. Is that okay, guys?
But do we have a policy statement, right, that we made?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Right, so can you just refer to that in this? You just say the quality of life in Arizona is to benefit future generations of all Arizonans consistent with the policies of the Flinn Foundation or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, in the language that's in the IPS is straight from that tab. basically, because to your point, I didn't want to reimagine the work that had already be done, because I know that that document and the posting was carefully
You could almost just
thought
have
about.
one sentence. It's our investment decisions will reflect the DEI policy as posted on our website or something.
Okay. I will take another look at it with our crew.
Okay. Anything else from?
There's a couple other elements to the IPS that we could just talk about briefly to make sure that when we bring it back for the final vote, everything's clear. Most of them are just notes of awareness. One thing to visit is the manager concentration limit. It does technically require an explicit investment committee vote to maintain adage over 18%. Do we want to take that out, since we usually just say we're not going to redeem? So that kind of is like taking an explicit vote. It's up to you all. We're just highlighting it for your thoughts.
I mean, there's no other manager that's even going to come close to that.
Right.
And
We're all
that's
very
not
well
changing for a
aware.
while.
We're very well aware we're overweight adage.
Right.
I'm okay to take that out
You can
because
take it out.
I think without that, it kind of frees up adage to stay large, but also weighted in the fact that with any manager decisions going forward, all that percentage and allocation and diversification comes into the conversation.
No,
So just to be clear then, so we take out the 18%, but what we do have as our own internal benchmarks are our allocations, and every time, every committee, we
Well, we
talk
see
about
it
whether we're
on our
over,
reports.
underweight, yeah.
Yeah, we know.
So that's the actual standard that we hold to, and we deviate consciously, like what we do, if we have reasons, so.
Okay, we'll take out the manager concentration limit. We just cleaned up some nomenclature, and then just note that we're going to be lagging the portion of the Miskey-Ackley benchmark that is associated with private investments to better match the time period for which those investments are reported. And I have to hat tip Cameron for that. We do that for a lot of clients, and I think it makes sense given the increased kind of larger size of Flynn's private investment portfolio at this point, that we try to match the benchmark from a timing standpoint with the portfolio.
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah, and I think Kimberly, you guys also removed the manager concentration within the portfolio, like that they can have a higher concentration of a stock. Like it wasn't just for a manager, but also underneath it. Am I not remembering correctly?
Yeah, so it also says to mitigate security specific risk, it is the intention of the committee that no more than 5% of the fund can be made up of any given equity position. I mean, it's hard to control that because you're not, always aware of every single position and every single portfolio. Usually we have at least the top 10. But
I think it's fine. I think it's fine. Yeah, I think it's fine. It's just more about, that was the other removal from the language. So I think I didn't have a problem with anything else.
That's fine.
Okay.
Can I just make one comment on the choice of terms? We say we're changing non-marketable alternative assets to global private equity. Is that going to incorporate, when you say private equity, it's usually a class of private investment. So is this really just private investments? Because it could be debt, it could be assets, it could be equities, it could be all kinds of things.
Right, so.
Maybe change the word to investment or some other broader.
Yeah. Good point. Well, the idea was just to make it consistent. So we used to call like the diversifiers allocation, which is generally made up of hedge funds. We used to call it marketable alternatives, and now we call it diversifiers. So that's the kind of the substitute there. And then private investments, I agree. It should be private investments as opposed to illiquid non-marketable alternatives. So yes, we'll make sure that's consistent.
Great. That's good. That's good. Very good.
So the only, if we have 2 minutes at the end that I will just be sure to point out, is, we had a discussion at the last meeting, or last couple of meetings, we've talked about impact and sustainability and mission alignment, and whether or not that was something that that Flinn wanted to do in a more intentional way. And we just noted some of the areas of focus for Flinn, and maybe Tyrus, it might be helpful if you wouldn't mind just turning to page 7 of the supplemental materials. Just wanted to point this out so that people know that it's there. Highlighting, health and wellness, clearly, given what Flinn does, and we've already, really focused there where we can, like with the Andreessen Horowitz Bio Fund through Accolade, but also hearing from you at the last meeting that environmental sustainability also kind of falls in the purview in general wellness, particularly when you think about things like water for the Flinn Foundation. And now we didn't want to explicitly target yet. We want to just maintain awareness of kind of things in these areas. So on the next page, on page 8, we did kind of put together some general thoughts on some of the managers and across some of these different themes. A handful of managers in each area, some general kind of impact across the managers that are a bit more general. So on the marketable side, managers that you've all heard about, like a Generation, which has been hard closed, but they do maintain a wait list, and every once in a while we get the call from them, like we have recently, about clients that they're willing to add ownership capital, which you think is a very similar type of manager to a Generation. Actually, in our view, probably younger, smaller, and a little bit more nimble in terms of their ability to invest in this area. And then some private managers that will invest across the different themes. Healthcare and wellness, of course, we're already investing in Andreessen Bio, and I think there's a couple of very interesting healthcare funds, and generally continue to be very excited about healthcare as a theme. Through a little something different here in terms of how you can think about that. Acre is a private fund, and we're spending a little bit more time thinking about sustainable agriculture. So, they are looking at, so it's a venture, but they're looking at disruptive technologies in agriculture, food technology, and, how to think about really that area of health. And then, of course, environmental sustainability. There's a ton of options here. This is probably the most established area, given that, really is one of the earlier investment areas when you think about impact. GMO climate change is one we, Kim and I use a lot in our portfolios. Interesting enough, I'm not sure that we've brought this up with you, but Principal, your diversified real assets fund, is actually adding a climate, or has added a climate change sleeve to their portfolio, which we like, and for them and for others, it's not necessarily just a view of we want to make an impact. It's a view of you may miss out if you're not investing in some of the things that are actually fueling this transition. So if you think about things like mining copper or lithium, all these electric batteries can't run without lithium. And so we have to think about how we're going to fuel some of these technologies as they become more prevalent in the world. And then a number of private funds that are also investing in that type of sustainable change. So that we put a couple of different types of options on a page available so you can see, you know, how we think about some of these. Always happy to address, and if there is interest, bring to the committee. I think we can take those down, Tyrus. And the only other thing that I will just note before we leave you is that we may have to come back to you, Stacy and Rose. And I don't know if it will need to be before the next meeting, but literally just last Thursday, Friday, got a note from Legacy that they're going to have a close on their next fund in January, not January, at the beginning of July. Last time they opened, it was a one and done. They're indicating right now there may be some opportunity for us to do it in October. We have a call with them scheduled in 2 weeks. So as soon as I can get more information or some indication of what that may look like, we'll get it back to you. You know, you've been invested with Legacy for a very long time. We skipped their last venture fund, so I do really think that we should do this one in order to kind of maintain our ongoing relationship. And we've had phenomenal success with venture. Similarly, and then similarly, last one, our Accolade is also coming back to market, and they're doing so very quickly. And it's kind of that time, it's just that time in the world where these managers are coming very quickly. So we'll keep you posted on if we need to do something pre next meeting.
Okay, but we could always Zoom the committee or whatever.
Sure.
Okay, wow, thanks.
I have one real quick question. Natalie, does Cambridge have any view on the SEC proposal around climate change disclosures for publicly traded companies? Because I know the comment period ends this month.
I know, I saw that.
I didn't know if you guys are weighing into that fray at all.
We are not weighing into it. That being said, you know, we have signed on to the broader climate pledge, and, you know, as a firm, we're trying to work our way to net zero. We know that'll be longer term, but we are, you know, we're not, you know, making any official, I guess, opinions on this in particular.
That's going to be an interesting disclosure.
Okay.
Thank
all right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye. So Stacy, you wanted executive session?
Oh, that I don't think we, unless anyone had anything else to discuss, I think we're in good shape. I think at the June retreat, I'll tackle a couple of things around PRI is a little bit in the thinking. Some next steps there, but was there anything anyone else wanted to address or information they wanted, or just trying to make sure we're internally satisfying the committee too?
No, I think we're good. Okay.
It's nice to see you all, and Heidi, we can see you really well on the screen.
Thanks for staying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's always interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. All right.
And I think that's
we're
it.
done.
See you.
You took it.